Hello, everybody. If you can see the book I'm holding up on the video version of the podcast, it's called The Digital Delusion, How Classroom Technology Harms Our Kids' Learning and How to Help Them Thrive Again by Dr. Jared Cooney Horvath. And I first found out about the book. I was doing some research on the internet, and I think it was in the algorithm on YouTube, something popped up and I watched it. And I think it was Jared making a testimony to Congress or something along those lines. Yeah. And then I saw an Instagram post of him giving some statistics about the fact that children today's IQs are dropping and we're not outperforming our parents, things we'll get into today. But having looked into the digital issues, some of you may have listened to my podcast, The Danger of Living in Two Realities, where I talked about digital versus analog. If you haven't listened to that, it's a very potent podcast. And it's also got a video that you can watch. And so having kids of my own, most of you know I have a 10-year-old and a 6-year-old that are in Waldorf school, and we limit digital access, and we watched very carefully what happens. The Waldorf school requires we put them on a digital fast for a month at given periods, and we can see the change in their attitudes. Even though we only give them limited access, we can still see it's something that has to be very carefully managed. And there's just so much that I think is really important. And I must say, having done a thorough look through of Jared's book, it's extremely well written. It's loaded with factual information. And it's obvious that he is an educator just by reading his book. So I think you're in for a very important podcast today by a very well-educated man that knows a lot about education. And this is not only important for the children, it's important for the adults, because everything that he's showing in his research that's happening to children, I've seen happening to adults, because I have a lot of students, and boy, have I seen a lot of changes in my career. I founded the Chek Institute in 1995. So I've got 30 years of lots of students in front of me, and I have watched a lot of changes that are not positive with how they communicate, how well they do on tests, how they write their tests. And I could go on and on and on. And this podcast will be one that you will probably think very deeply about and hopefully share with a lot of people. So Jared, sorry for the long intro, but welcome. It's just a great pleasure. And I must say, namaste to you, partner, for this very, very powerful, beautiful book you've put out in the world. I think it's extremely timely and very important.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me on it. It's with someone who's experienced it firsthand, even with adult learners. You're right. We're all going down that same path.
Yes. It's a really, I think it's, in my circle of friends, and the ones that are parents, we're all hip to this and we're all taking measures. But, I'm a guy that's, in the non-consensus reality. My friends are all experts in plant medicine and are all deep into meditation and various spiritual practices. So they're all, high caliber, close to the earth farmers and people like that. So it's easy to get the impression that everybody's woken up to these things, but all you got to do is just walk out in public. I'll never forget the first time I was in an airport and I was sitting waiting for the plane, and right across from me was a guy about, 25 years old, who seemed to be married to the woman sitting, literally touching him. And I was watching them have a conversation back and forth on their phones by texting. They weren't even talking to each other. And I remember elbowing my wife, I think, who was sitting next to me, like, are you seeing what's happening right here? Look at this. These people don't even talk. They text each other. Yeah. And then I begin to see that happening all over the world. And I'm like, wow, we are in deep trouble, man. This is like serious problems. So, I've got a lot of concerns. But to begin with, Jared, because I do long form podcasts, we don't have to rush. Yeah. I think it's important for the guests and the audience to get to know you and what shaped you. So could you give us a bit about your background? Yeah. What shaped you into the man you are, and what inspired you to write The Digital Delusion?
Yes. So going all the way back, I grew up with a lovely family in Colorado. So there was a lot of outdoor time in my
Good.
family. And we had one of those parents, and I think this wasn't unique to us. I think this was our generation, that basically like around 8 a.m., my mom would say, all right, get out of the house. I don't want to see you till dinner. So
Great, good mom.
huge childhood of freedom and just exploration. You get into a lot of trouble. You do a lot of crazy stuff, but it's all for the best. That kind of inspires this, I don't know, you want to call, not anarchist streak, but this realization that, look, you can push back. You're allowed to exist in this world,
Rebel.
and that's okay. And so my undergrad was in film. I moved out to LA for a long time, went to film school out there, started teaching when I was in LA, tutoring, and then started teaching high school. And then back when I was teaching, when I was starting to work with kids, that was the decade of the brain. So that was when everyone was brain this, brain that, brain, and every book was about brains. And it sounded so important to me that I'm like, okay, well, cool. I'll go back to school and I'll learn that stuff myself. And I genuinely thought maybe to be a year of my life, I'll go learn about neuroscience, bring it back to my classroom, make teaching better. But that has now ballooned into 18 years. I've kind of been, you name a university, I've probably been there at some point. And I study what's called basically the science of learning. So my big realization was the more we understand how people learn, that helps us as teachers make better decisions in the classroom. It doesn't dictate what we do. It doesn't tell you have to teach like this, but by all means, it says, cool. It constrains your choices to say, now you have a better sense of what we're trying to get to, what works best for that. So that's where I study basically learning at any level, neuroscience, psychology, AI, behavioral economics, you name it. I've studied all of that. And I work primarily with teachers now and students and parents and say, if this is learning, how do we drive learning? So if you're studying at home, what do you do? If you're a parent working with your kids doing homework, what's the best way to kind of go about this? So realistically, just I think if you had to sum up my entire life, is just learning. How does it work? Not necessarily the strategies, but what is the process of learning that we can use to align our strategies and make better sense of why some things work and why some things might not?
Yeah, I'm going to ask you a question here that I didn't have in the outline.
Yeah, no worries.
Are you familiar with the work of Ian McGilchrist?
He wrote The Bicameral Brain. Is that him?
Yeah, he's the expert on the integration of the left and right brain, a neuroscientist from, I believe, Scotland.
Yep.
He's got some great material out there. But it seems to me that when we look at the way most people think about learning today, and this we'll get into later with AI stuff, it's very, very left-brained. And, Steiner, for example, I've studied his philosophy of education quite a lot, which is why my kids go to a Waldorf school. But he said that kids should not start reading till age 7 to 10 because it pushes them into their left brain prematurely. And he gives examples, but a simple example is if kids are pushed into their left brain early, then what happens as an analogy is they end up dissecting frogs in a classroom, and they can tell you about the actin and myosin filaments of the muscle or the digestive system of the frog, but they've never been to the pond. They don't know what a frog is. They don't know how it fits into the environment. They don't know what its function is in nature. So the problem is the frog just becomes another object you're cutting to pieces, but you don't have any idea, for example, after you've dissected 10 million frogs, what you've done to the ecosystem because you are not connected to wholeness, the right brain function of perceiving the whole. And so there's also so much emphasis in classical education systems, like public systems, for example, on mathematical logical learning styles. Howard Gardner said that was only 5 to 8% of the population's learning style, but 95% of all education imparted across the board from kindergarten up was mathematical logical.
Yeah.
But we don't address visual dominant or auditory or kinesthetic or some of the other styles of learning that Gardner presented. And for example, in the Waldorf system, the kids will act out myths. They'll make their own costumes by hand. Art is very involved in the education process. We're missing things like poetry. So it seems to me like we've got this very, very left brain type orientation, but it's cutting out the feeling nature. If you look at Jung's consciousness compass, Jung defined consciousness as having 4 key functions: thinking, feeling, sensing, and intuition.
Yeah.
And so it's as though we're so trapped in the thinking aspects that we're losing our capacity for feeling, for values, for the emotional component, or being pulled up into our heads, which is making us less and less body aware. So our sensory inputs are being shut down. Our intuitive faculties are not being developed. And so it seems to me that we really have a problem, and that AI is really like a giant left brain. It's just mirroring the intentions of its creators, which are largely atheist, brain-based people, no God, no soul. You're a hackable animal. And I just think these are issues. And as an expert in education, I'm curious as to your thoughts as to why are we allowing an education system to produce half-brained students?
Yeah. And I think you make a good point. There's a lot of stuff to kind of unpack there, but I think if you kind of go down to the very base of what you've just said, is we've started to view human beings as computers. And people talk about the brain like it is a computer. No, the brain, that is a metaphor. The brain is not a computer, and you are not your brain. You are not your brain any more than you're your heart or your lungs or your spleen or your toe or your knee. You're not in any of that stuff. That's why we've never found consciousness there. You are of the interaction of all of that. But of course, science has historically been reductionist. The entire movement of science has been atomization. Can we go backwards to the smallest building block that will then explain everything above it? Well, luckily, the counter to reductionism is called emergentism. That's a group of scientists who say, well, wait a second. Going backwards, you don't explain anything. You just erase everything that matters. If you want to make sense of the world, you can only build it up. Through interaction and holism, new properties will emerge that never existed before that. Just think of a car. If I showed you a car's engine and I said, hey, how fast is this engine? People would guess, oh, it looks like 8 cylinders, maybe 200 miles an hour, without realizing that, no, the engine has no speed at all. You put that engine on the ground, it ain't going nowhere, because speed isn't in an engine. It's not in an axle. It is not in a wheel. It is of the interaction of all of these parts. It is qualitatively unique and cannot be reduced down to any of the bits and bobs. By all means, it can be constrained by them, but it can't be explained by them. And I think that's what's going on with a big movement in most sciences now with human beings, is we're starting to say, hey, you took the metaphor a little too seriously. The brain isn't a computer, and we are not processing bits of information. We are a holistic, emergent property that must understand and interact with everything else. And so in most fields of science, I know right now, there are basically civil wars between the reductionists, we can keep going backwards, and the emergentists, no, we can only build up. And I always say, when people say, who's going to win that debate? I always say the emergentists, 100%. Because the reductionists are all going to die or retire in the next 20 years. That's how science changes. It doesn't really change on ideas. It changes on changing of the guard. When the old guard hands the torch over, it's all the young kids who are emergentists. When they're now the old folks, emergentism will be the dominant paradigm we use. But bring that back to school. I don't think school was ever intended beyond the mid-1800s to be a holistic place. I think that was a place where you cut your teeth in very specific scientific and legal and sociological endeavors. And I think testing kind of highlights that more than anything else. Why do we test so much stuff? We test basically what we can. And it is much easier to test somebody's knowledge or ability to interpret something than it is to test their feeling or their ability to recognize global patterns, at least in a standardized way. So I'm with you. I think school is very much in the reductionist mode. I can make arguments for and against it, but I think at the end of the day, an easy win is just remove a lot of the testing. Once you return, like there was a school I worked with in Australia, right? One of the things they did, they were about to go under. They were in the bottom 10% of everything across Australia. So the principal decided, okay, no more grades. No more. We'll do tests, but there's no grades assigned to them. The test is just so the teacher knows where the kids are at. we'll have no real class levels. Kids can learn what they need to learn when they need to learn it. And by the end of the second year of doing that, they had somehow, because they still had to take standardized tests for funding, but they didn't show the kids that. It was just to do the test, get out of here. They were in the top quartile, or the top 10%, I think, of the entire nation on everything. And everyone said, how did that happen? Because a good rule of thumb, if you focus on performance, there's no guarantee you're going to learn. So if testing is the goal, there's no guarantee you're going to actually understand or know what you're going to do. But if you focus on learning, performance is easy. If you generally know the stuff and genuinely understand how it all fits together, now when someone asks you a question about it, you can answer that question. That was the original goal of testing. So I think you're right. If we just scrapped a whole chunk of testing from schools, got rid of things like letter grades, kept testing at the end for any kid who wanted to go to uni, but those who didn't, don't worry about it. I think you'd have a much better alignment between kind of what you're saying, the reductionism and holism of what it means to be a human.
Well, I think as a guy who understands human physiology very well, I think one of the things it would do is it would drastically reduce stress-induced high cortisol and adrenaline levels in children. Oh, yeah. Because there's so much fear and sense of identity attached to test scores that I think it has, when it's very well known that when your cortisol levels are high and adrenaline's up, you're pushed into your left brain because it's a survival mechanism. As my common analogy is, you don't want to throw in a cartwheel when you're running from a lion. So we resort back to reflex, autonomic and unconscious behaviors that happen quicker than we can think for survival reasons. And so, you're not running from a real lion in a classroom when you're standing there with a, big test in front of you, but you're running from an imaginary lion, like, what's mom and dad going to say? Or what are my peers going to say? What if I'm not good at this? And so I see children collapsing into themselves. And, so something else you said, you used the word metaphor. And I think one of the measures of the dumbing down of culture is that very few people actually understand metaphor. Yeah. They often have not got the ability to grasp a metaphor and understand what a metaphor is. Joseph Campbell made that statement probably 40 years ago, saying that it was an issue then. And I in my life, I'll be 65 this summer, so I've been around for a while. I've been in my career for 42 years now. But I remember, I didn't enjoy school at all. I found it very frustrating. I couldn't get my questions answered. Teachers seemed to not like me for asking questions. And so later in my professional education, I remember when I was going to sports massage therapy school, I never got the highest scores. I usually scored around 85, 86%, but there was lots of people that were getting like 98, 99, 100%.
Yeah.
But when it came to actually testing, where they tested us with our hands and, okay, how do you release somebody's scalene muscles, or how do you stretch the psoas muscle, etc. The people that got the high scores beat me in the written testing were almost useless when it comes to actually applying it. And so they'd all be rushing over to me before the test. Can you show me how to do that? And I'm like, what are you asking me for? You're the one that got
Don't
the
you know all this?
highest score. They go, I can memorize stuff, but I can't seem to do it.
Yeah.
And it made me reflect on, why is it that I don't have that problem? And the simple answer was, I was raised on a farm. And I had to know how to do things. I had to know how to fix equipment. I had to, know how to use tools. I had to be able to get something from point A to point B, and a process had to be done, or you couldn't function as a farmer. And I had to consider the environment all the time. I had to consider a lot of X factors. If it's going to rain, you have to make changes in, how you feed animals, or when you bring hay in, or whatever. So I found that by being in an experiential learning environment where the process leads to an outcome, and if you don't pay attention to the process, you don't know you're going to get the right outcome, gave me a level of awareness and a sort of an internal intelligence that I saw most people just don't have. And I've seen this as a big problem. And I think that's something that needs to be considered from an educational perspective as well.
Hydration is one of the 6 Chek foundation principles for a healthy, holistic life. And now Peak has made it even easier to help keep your body and skin hydrated while also promoting better sleep, which is another of the Chek foundation principles, with their new Deep Hydration Protocol. Peak's Deep Hydration Protocol is a 2-part drinkable skincare system that keeps your body hydrated around the clock. Get a morning boost with BT Fountain, which is powered by clinically proven ceramides and hyaluronic acid for skin radiance and gives gentle, lasting energy to start your day. Relax in the evening with RE Fountain, containing triple Biomax magnesium to support deep rest, nervous system recovery, and next day mental clarity, helping you unwind and wake up refreshed. As with all of Peak's products, the Deep Hydration Protocol is made with clean, pure ingredients without sugar, fillers, or artificial flavors. It's easy to mix, simple to add into your morning and evening routines, and tastes great. Upgrade your hydration and wake up refreshed. Get 20% off for life, receive a complimentary gift, and explore Peak Life's entire line of Chek-approved teas and supplements at peaklife.com/Paul Chek. That's PIQUE life.com/Paul Chek.
I think it's interesting if you take IQ, so just general intelligence. IQ does not measure intelligence. It can't. Nothing can. Intelligence is a concept. It is an ethereal. It's not a thing like blood cells or height that I could just measure with a stick. But with that said, an interesting thing has happened since we started IQ testing. Each generation has gained about 6 IQ points on their parents. So that means my generation, millennials, we are about, if compared to our great-great-grandparents, we are either at 130 IQ to their 100, which means half of us are geniuses, or they're at 70 compared to our 100, which means over half of them were mentally decrepit. So of course, neither of those is true. So that's where you realize, look, it can't be measuring intelligence. And what I think we've kind of come to realize is it's measuring a very specific type of thinking, which we call school ability or academic ability.
There you go.
What does school do is it deals with conceptual categories and movement without any actual practicality. So similar to what you were saying, our great-great-grandparents weren't dumber than we were. It's just they were focused on answering practical questions that occurred right before them. They didn't need to know if there was a black duck sitting in a pond somewhere in New York, and that made sense. They're like, irrelevant. I need to make sure I can grow this food so things can happen. So what we've been doing is just shifting the way we kind of move our thinking from the practical to the more abstract. So that's, I think the scariest thing now is if you cut to Gen Z, their general IQ is going down. For the first time in history, they're dropping below millennials, their parents. And the natural inclination would be, cool, they're not getting stupider. I've never made that argument. I don't even know what stupid or smart means. They're changing the way they think, and they're going out of this conceptual nature, and we would think you would swing back into the practical nature, which is where we were before. They're not doing that either. So what are they doing? Nothing. So far as we can tell, they're not enhancing anything. Their practicality is as low as it's ever been, and their conceptual is now starting to get low. So the only thing we can really think is they are genuinely cognitively declining. And that's a very scary prospect. They're not putting it anywhere new. They're just putting it into nothingness or to triviality, scrolling. And that breaks my heart. Yeah, the one thing, so it's interesting. There are some aspects of human physiology that we thought were non-changeable. Cognition you can change, but some hard limits are going to exist, like working memory limit. Forever, we've thought that's going to be right around 7 objects plus or minus 2. That's what it is. Somehow Gen Z has even lowered on that measure. Their working memory limit is around 5.5. We didn't even think that was possible. So realistically, something crazy is going on. And the one thing that they're actually better than us at is basically rapid visual scene processing, which is exactly, you said, video games. They're really good at video games. Well, yeah. Cool. That's interesting. I don't know how many kids are ever going to make the world better by being better at FIFA. I'd much rather you all be better at actually playing soccer than simulating playing soccer, but all right. But so there's got to be that's going to lead us down a really weird path where we're going to either have to collectively agree, wait, our kids are going down and we need to fix this, or we redefine the world to make video gaming and whatever our kids are doing important. I don't know that I like that latter decision as much as the former.
I don't think it can go anywhere. The latter one, what I was looking through your book and thinking about the issue of intelligence, I just sort of sat with myself and said, how would I define intelligence? And what rose up in me is, if I had to define intelligence without looking in a dictionary, what came to me is the ability to solve problems and be creative.
Okay.
Because you have to be creative to solve a lot of problems.
Yeah. So you
have to be almost think outside the box.
Adaptability and problem. It's weird. The biggest definition of creativity, if I ever get to teach you, like, come take a course on creativity, it basically is problem solving. Creativity is nothing more nor less than traditional problem solving, which is the highest, as I agree with you, the highest. I say nothing more nor less because there's nothing unique about creativity that goes beyond the bounds of problem solving. But I also say nothing less because I think that's the highest thing human beings can do. We can adapt and solve problems like no one's business. That's kind of our superpower.
And I think one of the things that I've recognized, because I've been around long enough to see this happen, is that one of the most, I think, dangerous symptoms of the degradation of intelligence that I think was glaring during the pandemic was the lack of common sense that people exhibit. Yeah. I think people that have real intelligence inherently have common sense, because common sense is essential for problem solving. If you don't have, a reliable basic mental framework to work with, it would be no different than if somebody put you in math class and left everything out about the number 5. You would never be able to have mathematical common sense because there's an archetype missing that's inherent to mathematical common sense. And so, with this lack of common sense has come an over-reliance on digital technologies to answer questions, but then the people don't have the filtration system to say, is this even real or practical?
Yeah.
And so, you talked earlier about how the scientists that are leading the way have to die and the leaders have to die, but we're hoping for a new emergent group of people that are and have emergent abilities or the ability to think holistically. But at the same time, what you're describing right now is that we're at a very dangerous impasse, because if you look at the rates of disease and psychological illness and anxiety and depression and suicide amongst people between 18 and 25 years of age, it's the highest it's ever been in the history of humanity.
Yeah. And
they're lacking common sense, and they're digitally addicted, and
they have no physical abilities. They have no,
they don't, and we're going to get into a lot of this stuff in the outline, but I think we have a problem. Native tribal societies always thought 7 generations ahead. That's well described in the book, The Web of Meaning by Jeremy Lent, which I keep mentioning on the podcast because I think it's an important book for everybody to read. But they knew if we cut all these trees down to make firewood, it's going to cause a problem. There's going to be nothing to eat. If we fish the rivers out, there'll be nothing. They always were thinking 7 generations ahead. But, Jared, if we think 7 generations ahead right now, I don't even know if that's possible to do.
Well, we're being led by people who says there will be no 7 generations ahead. It's real hard to have the long view when you're told, oh, the end of the world is here and AI is going to kill us all. So we're being bombarded with reasons to think only about the selfish present moment. But you're right. That's an old Roman, I forget who said it, but they said a healthy society is one where parents plant trees whose shade they know they will never sit in. That's it. You're not thinking about yourself. You're thinking about what's going to come after me. But I think, step back, you make a really good point, is Common sense relies on healthy mental models. Where do healthy mental models come from? They come from knowledge and experience. At the end of the day, one of the best cognitive psychologists right now today, he finally pulled the trigger. He said, all higher order thinking, all higher order abilities, recognition, understanding come from lower level knowledge. So
Yes.
He says long-term memory is basically the seat of all human cognition. What you know will always limit what you can do. So, which makes it really cool. If I teach you really wonky stuff, I can give you really wonky understanding of the world. But at the same time, it just shows how paramount deep knowledge and understanding become. Like you said, if I don't even have an archetype for a number, there is no way I will figure out math because I have nothing to hang that stuff on. So there's an interesting, the PISA, is go back to creativity. Let me hit this real fast. So creativity and problem solving. How does it basically work? There are three stages really to any creativity. Now, remember, I'm just defining creativity as problem solving. So you have all of your knowledge in your brain or in your body, or we don't know where the heck it is, floating around you. Who knows? And you have this unknown problem set. And you need to kind of match your memories to this unknown set. That is problem solving. I think of it. Did you ever play that game Tangrams growing up, where it was like you have these 7 shapes and then a grayed out figure, and you needed to align those shapes to make that figure?
Yes. I don't think I played it when I was younger, but my kids have got games like that.
So that's where that's how I view creativity. All the shapes are your memories. The grayed out figure, that's what you're trying to solve. Now
you got pictures of that in your book.
Yeah. And then now that problem, like I was saying, it could be external, right? It could be, how do I clean up trash from the ocean? How do we move this over there? Who knows? But it could be internal too. How do I represent my angst using paint on a canvas? How do I show love using music? That's a problem the same as out here. It's internal, external. It's all the same.
Yeah.
And so creativity is mixing and matching your ideas. Now, how does it work? You enter into what's called focused thinking mode. That is when you consciously pull up memories from your own brain and you try and solve that problem, mix them and match them to solve this figure. But you can only do that for so long. And eventually you're going to quit. Like, let's say it's been 2 or 3 hours. You need to take a break. You haven't solved the problem. I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to have a drink, whatever, cook some dinner. When you step away, that's when biology gets to work. Now, completely subconsciously, devoid of any input from you, your brain is going to start to mix and match your memories. And it's going to say, hey, you learned this thing in 4th grade that you completely forgot about here. That kind of fits. Oh, and there's this little memory over here. And every once in a while, you're just doing the dishes. You're going to hit what's called a moment of insight. You're going to go, oh, I got an idea. Someone give me a pencil. I got to write that down. That insight is your biology connecting memories together that you didn't do yourself. So that shows that a huge chunk of creativity, some people estimate 70 to 80% of all creativity, critical thinking, common sense, is all going to happen subconsciously. But the problem is when you're in that diffuse thinking mode, when your brain is doing its own thing, it is stuck only with what is in your long-term memory. It cannot access the internet. It cannot ask ChatGPT for answers. It is stuck with only that which you know. So the vast majority of human thinking, if it is to be subconscious, will be limited by the knowledge you have and the knowledge you have acquired. Now, cut to today, where we're using ChatGPT and AI and digital tools to basically skip knowledge learning. Why would kids waste time learning stuff when they could just use ChatGPT to access that stuff and then go about their business? And you start to realize, no, if you don't learn stuff, there is no business to go into beyond there. You're stuck. So go back to what I was talking about, the PISA. This is an international exam given every 3 years to 90 plus countries now. So hundreds of thousands of kids around the world take it. And it tests knowledge in math, science, and reading. But in 2018, they also included a measure of creativity. Now, whether or not you can measure creativity, I'm happy to have that debate. I think it's kind of nonsense, but they brought in the best we can do right now to measure creativity. So when it came to the knowledge tests, the East Asian countries killed it. Singapore was number 1 on math, science, and reading. Japan, number 2. China, number 3. Who's always number 4? South Korea, number 4. Always the same. They brought in creativity because they thought, we're now going to look at something deeper, something more broad, more holistic. Guess who got the top in creativity? Singapore, Japan, China, and Korea. No one expected that. Everyone thought, oh, here's where the US is going to come on. No. Why did they do so well in creativity? Because creativity is predicated on what you know. Common sense is predicated on what you know. If you don't know a lot of stuff, you're not going to be creative. You're just going to flounder around. And that's exactly what we saw. So I think you're right. Knowledge is or trying to erase knowledge learning from schools will be a huge detriment to common sense and creative ability and critical thinking, just because people have nothing else to fall back on. So it's almost like that copy and paste. What did the computer tell me? That must be true. What did the news tell me? That must be true, without being able to say, well, wait a second, what are you bringing to this table?
Yeah. Now, I'm going to bring up something here that I think is important, and I'd love to hear your opinion on it.
Yeah.
Because as I was researching and looking at all the important information in your book, it brought me to something quite important that I have to share with you to hear your feedback and your thoughts. Your book's really positioning itself primarily in the digital era. My grandfather was a school teacher in the Los Angeles School District for 35 years. So was my grandmother. She became the superintendent of the Redondo Beach School District for many years before they both retired. My grandfather probably died when I was about 14 or 15, but I distinctly remember him telling me, he said, Paul, what you need to understand is that right now, and this was his last year as a school teacher, he said, 35 years into my career, the students graduating in 12th grade are actually taking the curriculum that I began teaching 35 years ago to 8th graders.
Yeah.
And so he said way before iPhones and all this other shit, that the entire student body that he encountered was having learning difficulties before the digital era. And he had clearly stated they were 4 grade levels behind. And my grandmother echoed the same thing. And these are very, very experienced teachers. And my grandfather taught arts and crafts to the deaf, dumb, and blind. He was an expert gemologist. He worked on one of the space shuttles because he has very specialized saws for cutting diamonds, and they had a problem insulating wires in key regions to protect them from heat. And it turned out that they had to use specific types of stones. And my grandfather turned out to be the only guy that they could get access to that had this particular equipment and knew how to cut these stones.
Yeah.
And he was a super intelligent, super creative man, an expert teacher. And obviously my grandmother was too. She wouldn't have risen to be superintendent. So what I'm asking you, Jared, is what happened all the way back then? Because we're really actually only seeing a problem that's been growing for a long time, getting a lot worse because of everything we're talking about today.
So that's what I typically say that's the biggest argument everyone makes against what I'm saying now too, is I say every generation thinks the last generation was worse. Every generation of teachers thinks it was better when they started. Every generation of parents thinks their kids are underperforming them. So how do we kind of grapple with that is you have to step out and just go to the data and say, well, okay, what illustrations do we have of this trend? And that's where I'd say, for good or for bad, our great grandparents were incorrect. All the data shows we were getting better at literacy, we were getting better at numeracy, we were getting better at the textbooks. When your grandfather, and I'm not saying anything bad against your grandfather or grandmother, but when your grandmother and grandfather retired, the textbooks they were using were actually 3 years more advanced than the textbooks they started with. Every about decade or so, textbooks move up a year to the point where when we were in 8th grade learning math, the textbooks we were using, the textbooks 10 years later, they would have been our 9th grade textbooks. There's so much more. Fields are growing so fast that the amount of basic knowledge kids need is expanding. If you go read a textbook from the 1800s, it's hilarious how narrow it is. It's fantastic. It's just you realize how much we've grown since then and how much we have to learn. So that's when we typically say, all right, I'm going to step away from anecdote, going to step away from that and just look at the straight data. And looking at the straight data, we've only been going up. And it was right around 2006 to 8. That was kind of peak education. That's where you could say more kids in the world than ever before had access to it. More kids in the world than ever before were succeeding through it. Scores on standardized tests, for what it's worth, were as high as they'd ever been in history. Scores on cognitive tests, for whatever it's worth, were as high as they'd ever been. So it was all going up statistically. The data was speaking differently than our lived experience. But now, since then, the data and our lived experience are really starting to grow together. And so that's where I sit on the newest moment to just say, look, we can go back to doing something more decent than what we're doing now.
One of our favorite drinks at the Chek household is Paleo Valley's bone broth protein. Whether you're looking for a sweet or savory treat or a boost for your baking, soups and stews, Paleo Valley's grass-fed bone broth protein is the answer. It's rich in collagen and the amino acids glycine and proline, which can help support healthy gut function. And it's made from bones of 100% grass-fed animals, unlike many other collagen products, which use animal hides instead. Paleo Valley's bone broth protein is super easy to use. Just add a scoop into hot water, coffee or tea, blend it into your favorite smoothie, or add to any recipe or baked treat for a protein boost. Whatever your preference, Paleo Valley has you covered. From chocolate, vanilla, or salted caramel flavors to savory original and turmeric ginger, there's a flavor for everyone. Or choose the unflavored option for cooking and baking. Try Paleo Valley's bone broth protein and save 15% on your purchase by going to paleovalley.com/Chek15. I know you're going to love it no matter which flavor you try. So save 15% at paleovalley.com/Chek15.
I can appreciate that, but I'm going to challenge your position on that by sharing something my grandfather and grandmother both shared with me. Based on what you just said, the children should have been moving with the advances of the education curriculum, because you said the textbooks are getting more complex. So 35 years is quite a span of time.
Yeah.
But one of the things my grandfather said, and grandmother, because they both had to deal with this directly, he said one of the reasons he wanted to get out of the school system is because there was so much guns, violence, drugs, and young girls getting pregnant. And I said, well, why do you think that's happening? And he said, Paul, I have many people in our classes, and the school is loaded with kids that have failed their high school examination 3 years in a row. So we now have 19 and 20-year-old young men bringing guns and drugs into the schools. And because they're actually young men, they're not boys anymore, they're having sex with all these young girls. And so we've got massive problems with pregnant girls who aren't getting supported by their families. And it's leading to a significant increase in abortion and children being put into, foster homes and all sorts of problems. And if what you're saying is true, that shouldn't have happened.
Not necessarily. So it just, statistically speaking, and again, I'm not trying to throw anyone under the bus, this is not a value judgment on anyone. Education half a century ago was highly controlled. Very few kids had access to it, and the ones who had access to it were going to succeed through it. As public education especially started to expand out, you get more and more and more and more and more people. But let's say we get 100 more kids. If even 10% of those 100 additional kids succeed, that's 10% more than we had the year before. Stats are going to go up, even if 90% are still sitting there struggling. So it's, oddly enough, by expanding access, you will see increase in success. You're just going to also see not everyone is going to succeed through that. So the argument is, do we go back to, and again, there's no right or wrong answer to this. Do we go back to highly selective schools where certain kids are allowed, you have to pass a certain test? I know countries that do that right now. Italy is very much, you're not going to go to the next level unless you've passed this level. Or do we keep K through 12 general, in which case we're going to have to deal with, in order to save 10% of the kids, we're going to have to deal with 90% of kids who don't want to be saved, or who are just there because they have no other, their parents force them or whatever. It's going to be like that.
Right. Well, I know of and have worked with several teachers.
Yeah.
Many people, because you can enter my institute as a career change, and many of them have been school teachers that have expressed complete frustration and burnout. Prior to me marrying Penny, I spent 1 year in an intimate relationship with a school teacher, and I've known many through my work, and they've expressed tremendous frustration with the curriculum in schools. They felt it's not educating kids. Consistently, they've all made suggestions and said that their suggestions were either tied up in bureaucracy or completely ignored, and it was just like talking to a wall. Some of them changed careers. Some of them started homeschooling programs, which I think is fantastic. The woman that I was in a relationship with became a Waldorf school teacher. So my question is, who is behind the creation of education curriculums, and why, for example, are we so behind countries? You mentioned some top ones. When I did research into this years ago, I found that the top 3 ranking schools for scholastic standards for like putting kids out that actually have a brain that works were Canada, Japan, and New Zealand. But interestingly, I also found that the highest rates of suicide were in Japan and New Zealand because kids claimed that they were too insecure because the competition in those schools was so high that they couldn't keep up. So a lot of kids actually were suffering from severe psychological stress due to the fact that they felt that they were useless and were valueless because they couldn't perform against some of the top kids. So my point is that there's a double-edged sword. Though Japan and New Zealand were highly regarded for their scholastic standards, it was also producing serious psychological problems in children.
Yeah.
But the real question is, who is behind these curriculums, and why are intelligent teachers trying to improve the system being ignored?
Yeah, I think you've got kind of 2 things to kind of respond to there. And one is that high pressure, high tension situation that school has become. I think that's a very good argument for multiple school models. If school as it stands right now doesn't work for everyone, my answer has always been cool. Then build a different school. Like that's where I love the concept of, we don't need one model. You have many different schools. You have a TAFE, you have an IT institute. You have these different schools that allow for different pathways into adulthood. Because believe it or not, going to college isn't the right pathway for a lot of different reasons. Like,
I went to trade school.
There you go. The only reason you go to college is, well, there's some, but for like, if you wanted to become a lawyer, I imagine you're going to have to go to law school. If you want to become a doctor, you're going to have to specialize in medicine. There's no way around that. But for the vast majority of what the rest of us do, research and stuff, there would have been other ways to go around getting there. So that's why I'm totally open to this idea of multiple models. We don't all need to take the SATs. We don't all need to go to school. The kids who want to go that path, there will be a competition element. The kids who don't, cool, there's other ways to kind of get through this. But moving past there, how do we get to kind of who selects this? That's the big. So I lived in Australia for 12 years. When I first moved there, I was invited to a curriculum meeting with the government. And there's about 100 of us in a room. We're all going to talk about curriculum and stuff. And it was about 10 minutes into that session that I raised my hand. I said, wait a second, are there any teachers in here right now? Like practicing teachers?
Good question.
And of course the answer was no. There was politicians, there was lawyers, there was researchers like me at the time. And like, don't you guys think that's a problem? And they hemmed and hawed and they debated and they discussed and they came back with the answer that no, that's not a problem because we are developing the product. So in their mind, school is a product. Kids are the customers. In their mind, kids are customers and teachers are merely levers by which we get the product to the customer. Right. That's why teachers have no say in any of this. The people who have the say have never worked in a classroom in their life. Most politicians who make these decisions have not been in a classroom. Most superintendents and principals of schools across the US have not been in classrooms either ever or for decades. They've gone down a leadership track. When you're that far removed from the day-to-day reality of what it means to be a teacher and learning and education, the decisions you make are always going to be somewhat silly to the practitioners. The people on the ground are going to...
Anthony Fauci right there.
Well, that's it. The people on the ground are going to look at you and go, what are you doing, dude? Like, it's one thing. It reminds me of that scene from Good Will Hunting where they're sitting down by the in the Commons in Boston, and he says, you can tell me everything about the Sistine Chapel. You can tell me who painted it, what colors he used, but you cannot tell me what it feels like to stand there and crane your neck up and look up.
Yeah.
That is what you lack. The decision makers in education in the US specifically, that is what we lack. They lack any understanding or experience of what it means to be a teacher. So I think and that's why until we give teachers a voice, I left that meeting. I said, I'm not coming back until 50% of people in this room are teachers. There's no reason we should be doing this. And 12 years later, I never went back to another one because they never quite figured it out. But I think it's a weird world when I think bring on the tech issue too. A lot of parents know that tech is a problem in schools, but they're waiting for the teachers to speak up. Teachers do not have a voice. We never have. Because our job is on the line. If we speak up and say, no, I'm not going to do X, they go, cool, you're fired. Like there was a district I was working with in Kansas. The superintendent put a daily minimum limit on what kids had to use tech in each class. So if a teacher was found to not use at least 20 minutes of technology in their class every day, that teacher could get fired. What? So, I mean, that's where you see teachers they're not the mechanisms of change in education. So I always try and tell parents, you guys are the change. When parents start talking and parents start pushing back, they're the ones who have the power to move. And then teachers will swing in behind the parents. Parents are always the first kind of port of call when it comes to change. Teachers have to follow them because they cannot they cannot lead the brigade. They need to follow the brigade just because of the structure of schooling.
Well, this is what we call in the military a snafu. Do you know what snafu stands for?
Situation normal.
All fucked up.
Yep.
It's right in the dictionary. Anyone can look it up. This is a snafu. So my question is, what you just observed still is not answering the question because I'm asking who's developing the curriculum. And what you're telling me is a bunch of middlemen are controlling the teachers, but they're not writing the curriculum.
It'll be the same groups, the groups that were at that curriculum meeting, lawyers, politicians, ex-teachers who are now researchers. They're the ones who write curriculum. So believe it or not, you don't even have to have any tie to education whatsoever. It's whoever's the government at the time will select a body to say, you guys are in charge of creating the curriculum for blank. Like South Australia right now is doing it right now. They got together dozens of people. None of them are practicing teachers and say, you guys need to rewrite our curriculum on science, rewrite our curriculum on math to focus on X, Y, Z. So maybe now to focus on X, Y, Z would be the politicians writ large. They're the ones who get to say, we want at least one focus on science. We want one focus on evolution. We want one focus on vaccines. Maybe they get to pick the overriding things. And then basically the middlemen, us, I've been part of those groups. We then build the curriculum that then goes into the schools and off you go.
I'm going to share something that I know you know about, but I find it deeply disturbing. I've watched a lot of documentaries and looked into this myself, and there's hard evidence that the Rockefeller Institution a direct influence on our education. And so is the Gates Institution and the Carnegie Institution. And I've seen numerous parent-teacher association meetings saying during COVID, all this pornography stuff was being put into schools. I saw parents with 5 and 7-year-olds showing books that they were given by school teachers that were hardcore porn, trying to convince the kids that, they could change sexes and all this shit. So, Jared, we do have some awareness of where this influence is coming from, and it's clear it's actually producing a less and less effective curriculum, and that teachers are getting more and more frustrated and burned out with it. And so I understand what you're saying, but we're kind of in the same situation. Just like you're saying it's not teachers that are writing the curriculum, we're now expecting parents that are not educators to identify the problems in the education system and make a change in it, but they're not qualified to determine how well their kids are learning. They can only tell based on common sense observation, which goes right back to the catch net of their own education.
Yeah.
And so, it doesn't take that much detective work. If you want to use AI for something useful, ask it these questions and it'll point you right back to Rockefeller, Carnegie, and all these devious little creatures, which goes back to questions that we're going to get into later in the podcast. But like, the reason I'm bringing this up is because we've got some serious problems on our hands here. Our children are our future. I'm 65. I got a 46-year-old, a 5-year-old grandson, a 10-year-old, and a 6-year-old. And I am deeply concerned about the future that my kids, the question is, can they survive the shit we're leaving behind on every level? I could go off for 2 hours straight just naming areas of serious problems. At some point, we've all got to step in and say, we got to stop this bullshit. And we got to actually start using this advanced computing power like AI to do research and find out who the hell we got to cut the funding off. And we got to start being more conscious of what our tax-paying dollars are funding, from wars in the Middle East to wherever, because our money is being used. Obviously, Epstein papers revealed a hell of a lot of bullshit. But at some point, we've got to just stop it. And I don't know
I think
podcasts it's going to take.
There's going to be different fronts to this battle. And so and I think if you try and tackle it holistically, you're gonna collapse, because there's, as you suggested, there's a lot going on. So that's why I think I've really narrowed my focus down to digital technology. That's a front that I can understand learning. That's a front I can get. And if I can make a dent there in my life, hopefully that will be job well done.
Good job.
And other people will be working their fronts. And eventually, and that's, so as a parent, if you get overwhelmed, don't think to, we call them proximal versus distal goals. The distal goal is to change or rehabilitate education. I wouldn't even say change, go back to what we know is good. But the proximal goals are, what can I do today that actually gets me one step closer to that goal? Anytime you focus on the distal goal only, you get overwhelmed, you start multitasking, you try and do too much, you don't do anything particularly well, most things collapse. That's why New Year's resolutions typically collapse. You're focused on too big. Get nuanced. Go back to the proximal. What can I do today? And I think today my battle is just the digital tech angle. If we can tick that box, solve that problem, that will then open the door to start kind of going down other avenues as well.
It seems, though, that we need to get somebody with your level of awareness to create a committee and then find people in the key areas that we're missing that are essential for a healthy education, especially considering the things we need to educate children for moving forward, because what we've got to educate them to handle now is a lot different than it was 20 years ago because of the shifts in the environment. For example, we have to educate children on how to identify what the truth is, so they're not just given statistics on screens and believe it. We have to say, we need a lesson on how do you actually, what is the work of determining the truth, and how do you measure up what a truth is that works?
And you realize how complex that is in our current society, where we live in a postmodernist, relativistic society where a lot of people say there is no such thing as truth. And if you ever try and teach a kid,
we have, right?
If you try and teach a kid a truth,
do you get along in your marriage? Yes or no? There's truth.
There's got to be some truth too there.
Can you fix the engine and make it work? Yes or no? That's truth. I mean, when we start, that's what Ken Wilber calls sick green, by the way.
I think what's the fear of truth has led to a basic fear in values. And I think that's what school has always been good at. Is so go back to the invention of public schooling in the US. Thomas Jefferson, the grandfather of public schooling, he would have said very clearly that school is not here to serve a society. School is here to build a society. We serve one function, the democratic experiment is we're here to give kids a certain set of values of understanding so that they can live in this society together. Is that the same set of values everywhere in the world? No, but that's what we have selected here. And that's why you very rarely hear about educational crises in religious schools. Catholic schools, they know exactly what they're here for. So when everything else is collapsing, a Catholic school says, yeah, we're making Catholics, so back up. Military schools, they have a very clear values standard. Here's what we're doing. If you don't like it, you don't come here. It's pretty simple. And that's where I think public schooling is in this very strange place where as we enter post-truth and there is no truth, then people start to think there must also not be any values, or values themselves become dangerous tools, in which case there's nothing. And if school doesn't have a value, if we're not here to actually produce something, all we do is waffle. And it wouldn't be surprising then that kids come out more confused sometimes than when they go in. It's because we've lost kind of our guiding light to say, here's what we're trying to achieve through this K through 12 education.
Your liver is responsible for many essential functions in your body, including flushing toxins and harnessing nutrients. Organifi's Liver Reset contains a potent blend of adaptogens, including milk thistle, artichoke leaf, trefoil, and dandelion root, to support liver health and the removal of excess toxins for improved digestion and energy promotion. Pair this with Organifi's Gold drink and you have their Recovery Stack Bundle. Gold is a delicious nighttime tea made with 9 calming superfoods. It's a creamy turmeric blend that helps you wind down, relax, and support your body's natural recovery cycle while you sleep. Now you can get 20% off your order of Organifi's Recovery Stack Bundle. Go to Organifi.com/Chek20 and use the promo code Chek20 for 20% off your order. That's Organifi.com/Chek20 and use the promo code Chek20.
Well, absolutely. And I think you've pinned the tail on one of the donkeys for sure. This whole dissolution of the truth. If anyone hasn't read the book Radical Freedom by Ken Wilber, who's, considered one of the greatest philosophers of our time. I've spent 30 years studying Ken Wilber. Yeah. He points out from the value structure perspective that what we're dealing with that's washing out this sort of sense of what the truth is, he calls the sick green values meme. I don't have time to explain it thoroughly here, but anybody can listen to or read the book Radical. It's called Radical Wholeness, I believe. But it's, this has led to confusion as to whether a male is a male or a woman's a woman. So, like when you get to the point where you're confused about what sex you are, you don't have a problem of whether it's the truth. You have a problem of how you're educating people and whether they have common sense and whether they can even understand a fact of nature. Mm-hmm. That alone, to me, says we're in far deeper trouble than dropping IQ scores.
Well, bring that back now to, say, digital tech and education. One of tech's biggest selling points is that every kid can have a personalized education. We are going to teach you what you need when you need it, allow you to kind of pick your path, go your direction. And that circumvents the very function of school. School, by its definition, has always been collective. I do not need 30 kids going in 30 different directions. I need 30 kids going in one direction. Mm-hmm. And so maybe I could draw this back to technology. I could draw this back to AI as well, is that hyper individualization of instruction, of curriculum, of what questions we're going to ask you versus what you're going to see next. That's probably a very good path to make sure you're going to get this mass differentiation of some people believe X, some people believe Y, some people believe Z, some people believe A, some people believe B. And now we have a choice as an institution to say, okay, believe whatever you want to believe, but in this context, we're trying to get you to understand blank. Or you say, in this context, we're never going to make a value or a statement ever again, in which case you're just going to have kids coming in, going out, completely different. And that's not what you want from education. There has to be some unifying element to what we do. And I think tech, in its personalization, harms that ability to unify anyone.
You're making me remember my studies of Confucius. Have you studied Confucius at all?
No, I know of him, but I have not, outside of the few quotes you see here and there, never.
Well, Confucius was a very deep man, and I spent a fair bit of time studying him, but Confucius was a big proponent of what he then called a classical education, which included math, writing, arts and crafts, history, a study of history. I can't remember. There was like 7 key elements that Confucius said you have to have these basic foundational aspects to an education.
Yeah.
And why I think this is important is because if our education system does not teach children or people the basics that are essential to both healthy left, right brain hemisphere function and integration, if we don't know the basics of creativity, if we don't know the basics of problem solving, mathematics, reading, if we don't understand our history, which is being totally confused, etc., what we have is we narrow our framework of perception. There's I'll quote a statement by Dustin DePerna in his books, Stream, I believe it's called Streams of Life. It's an investigation into how consciousness evolves. He says no Christian ever sees the Buddha in an enlightenment experience because they don't have a framework of perception. If they've been a Christian, they're indoctrinated. So their mind can't conceive of something outside their perceptual framework. So if we don't have an education system that gets very clear on what are the basic types of knowledge or fields of understanding that we need to know the basics on, then we actually start producing children with a narrower and narrower framework of perception. And so what you get is today, like I'm a therapist who's rehabilitated countless people from different walks of life. And I can tell you the world's greatest athletes don't have the first clue about how to eat properly. I can tell you fighter jet pilots and CEOs of major corporations don't have the basic understanding of basic interpersonal relationship skills, diet, lifestyle factors. In fact, a lot of these people end up spending a huge amount of their money dealing with diseases they created by being ignorant, where they should have had a field of perception and a basic understanding that shit that lasts a year on a shelf doesn't do well in a human body. I mean, just common sense stuff, And so I think what I'm putting on the table here is that if we don't get clear that a person's perceptual field is limited by the basic education, and if it doesn't look at the kinds of intelligence Howard Gardner brought up, which I believe was at least 8 different types of intelligence, such as musical intelligence for one.
Yeah.
You have kinesthetic intelligence, movement intelligence, which leads to my next question. Then we're going to produce smart, dumb people, which is what we've done. We've got people that are very smart, yet very dumb at how to live. And if you don't know how to live, then you don't know how to invest your money in things that support life.
I think if you want to add to that too, you could say, look, if you want to think outside of a box, you first got to understand the box. One of the reasons why, if you study neuroscience, the first thing I tell my kids is 10 years, your job is to come back and tell me why I was wrong. But in order to do that, you now need to understand everything I know. And if you don't start where I'm at, you're never going to be able to push past me. And I think that's one of the, another tricky thing with tech is, and I'm stepping out of the classroom now, but once smartphones got cameras, everyone became a professional photographer. You no longer needed to study photography. My vision is my vision and it's brilliant. No, it's not. Everyone became a model. Look how pretty I am. Yeah. You're not a model. There's a system by which you need to go through to figure out how you can break rules. You're not different when you take a new picture. You just are ignorant. Like when my 5-year-old niece draws a picture of a horse, it doesn't look like any other horse, but that's because she doesn't understand what's going on. It's not creative. It's not unique. It's not special. It is her learning. Now, when Picasso draws a horse and it doesn't look like anything anyone's ever drawn, it is highly creative because it's coming from such a depth of understanding that when he breaks a system, he does it on purpose. And he can tell you exactly why he made the decisions he made, what he was pushing back against, what he was demonstrating. You need the base if you want to think beyond the base. And I fear that tech has given kids, and not just kids, all human beings, the belief that a fleeting thought, an opinion is now as solid and strong and creative as someone who has spent decades mastering something and then themselves tried to break it.
I get it all the time in my lectures all over the world. I say, isn't it amazing that the dumbest people in the audience always have the harshest opinions and are willing to put up the biggest fight when their education is so shallow, it's not measurable. You know, I see it all the time. And we see this politically, we see this socially. You know, these are serious problems. That's why I'm bringing these things up with you. Because of your background, but because I think everyone listening and watching has to really start considering this, especially if you're a parent. And I'll just use one of the things you just said to show you how Paul Chek's brain thinks. If you said to me, I want you to go study brains for 10 years and then come tell me how you're going to solve the problem of this brain-based ideology, for example.
Yeah.
My first question for you would be, how did we create brains? Because brains only begin to emerge in the class of creatures we call jellyfish. They were the first ones to have a nervous system. So you have to say, how the hell did we create, or did nature create brains without a brain?
What's the problem? What is the structure? What's it?
And what does the word brain mean? Because Steiner goes at length to show you that membrane, the membrane of a cell, is actually what catches the flow of energy and information from the environment and converts it into information that the cell can use. A shaman's drum is a membrane, and he couldn't do healing without the membrane, and it doesn't have the ability to pass an IQ test. So the whole concept of brains and intelligence is what's led to AI, which is a reductionist ideology, and the whole field of neuroscience is getting deeper and deeper and more lost. And I could say, okay, let's get down to brass tacks. What is a brain? It's a bunch of cells. What are cells? A bunch of atoms. What do you get when you look into an atom? 99.999 to the sixth or ninth place, empty.
Yeah.
So then we have to ask a bigger question. What is it that's creating all of this? Because we don't see a giant fucking brain in the sky. Like, people have lost the ability to solve problems. You have to be able to say, what caused that? How did that get here? People just are too lazy to actually do the thinking. Now, if I didn't have that ability to think, I'd be useless as tits on a bull as a therapist. I would have died as a farmer, and on goes the list. I would have been a useless mechanic. I wouldn't have run a single stock car race, motocross race, and I would have died as a paratrooper in the Army.
But you can think, and you're asking big questions.
I'm asking the questions everybody should be asking, because I got a 9th grade education and was raised on a fucking farm covered in sheep, horses, cows, chickens, and vegetables, for Christ's sakes. Like, if I'm asking these questions, why are we not all asking these questions, unless we have reached the point where we're too drunk, tired, confused, lost, scared, and confused to know how to think? And if that's the case, then we better start huddling around the fire and coming up to some fucking solutions right now.
I think that's where Neil Postman would come in, and he'd say, you're right. Back to the AI thing. He describes 3 different classes of technologies, 3 different stages of tool use. One is the tool users. This is when human beings just build tools to solve immediate problems. I need to smash this
coconut
nut. Here's a rock. Phase 2 is when all tools solve the same problem, efficiency. This is when you just move into, can we do things better, faster, stronger? Phase 3 is when you build things with no reason for them to exist, and then you ask the world to adapt to that tool. That's his definition of technopoly. So what's happening underneath all of these phases is, during phase 1, just tool using, man is seen as divine, tool is seen as an offshoot or a creation of man. During phase 2, man and tool are still seen as different, but metaphors really start to bleed. That's where you start to hear that man needs to blow off steam. Well, we don't really have steam like a steam engine, but it's a metaphor. But the metaphors start to bleed. Our discussion of ourselves starts to look like tools. When you get into this final stage, man is a tool. It is no longer a metaphor. We are nothing more than a tool, and we are worse than the tools we have created. Man
That's
is
the
not
World Economic Forum's position.
That's it. We're not a computer. We are a bad computer. We are not AI. We are bad AI. And that's where you now get to, I say with you, is that's where I'll go back to kind of base principles. I say, so what is the whole world view? What is the understanding of AI? And if I kind of always boil down, AI makes the following assumptions: that human thought is best represented in speech. Now that's 100% false.
Yes.
We do not think. We think and then translate it into speech. But according to AI, no, if it cannot be said, it does not exist. So thinking isn't before speech. Thinking is language in human beings. That brings us to principle 2. Well, if human thinking is best represented in language, and language can be modeled, which it can, that means human thinking can be modeled. And that's where the subtle kind of shift, where AI went from just interesting tool to intelligence. It's like, no. Now you have denigrated humans so far to make your tool look so important. In order to make the technology work, you had to basically strip us of everything that makes us. And people believed it, which then brings us into principle 3. If human thinking is best represented in language, if language can be modeled, then thought can be modeled. Only AI has the speed, power, and knowledge to model language to a level whereby we're going to find discoveries and understand really what's going on. Ergo, AI is the better brain than humans. AI is not just intelligent, it's more intelligent than we'll ever be. And that's just, to anyone who stops and thinks, nonsense. In order for AI to work, it basically needs access to every single bit of information ever put on the internet. LLMs work on every bit of information. In order for my 3-year-old to work, she needs a little bit of input and she's just fine. She does not need to read every book that's ever been published, every post that's ever been published. So clearly we're dealing with qualitatively very different things. But I think that's what happens is when you don't pay attention to the deeper questions. What are the stories behind these tools? Where do these tools come? What is the philosophy driving these tools? You sometimes miss the deeper truths, which are, this thing is not here to help us. Its entire function is to be better than us. And we're letting it, or assuming that that is exactly what it is doing. And when you bring that into schools, that's a very bad way to learn.
There's another issue that I want to put on the table because you're marching right down that path. And I believe Postman is one of the people that said this. There's others because I've studied this out of these deep concerns. And there's a lot of researchers that have looked into the history of humans' use of tools. And one of the conclusions I've seen come up multiple times is that the more time we spend engaging tools and machines, the more machine-like we become. Mm-hmm. And I've talked about this on my podcast before, but I'm going to encourage you to do this. If you go on Amazon, there's a documentary on the Blue Angels. Okay. You know who the Blue Angels are?
Yeah, the elite flying.
Right.
Yeah.
You watch as it shows you how they train these pilots, and you watch how they talk to each other. Watch how their bodies move. I'm an expert in human movement. They walk and talk like robots. And I'm like watching this documentary going, oh my God, these guys have spent so much time in the cockpit of a fighter jet and in simulators that they have actually become a human version of a fighter jet. And they think and act in and out of the airplane like a machine. And it was so glaringly obvious. It was shocking to me. I'm like, I was watching more to see the way of that the whole psychophysical relationship had adapted so thoroughly to a machine environment that I wish I could study a group of people like that and get some really intelligent people that know how to study different facets of human consciousness and cognitive abilities and learning styles to see what is this actually doing to people. You know, I could go off on a long discussion. You know, when you look at nature as an analog-based environment, digital is an on-off environment. Yeah. So I've seen a number of experts talking about how our interaction with all this digital technology is actually having a negative effect on our psychology and our physiology because it's making us more and more like computers because we're interacting with them so much. And look, if you want to see what happens, all you got to do is change who a child interacts with and you change the child, right?
Yeah. It's what's the best way to, I've heard that phrase is I think it was Adler. Man makes tools, thereafter tools make man. The more you use it, the more you think like it, you have to assume the worldview of it. And then it becomes impossible to think outside of that worldview. Like my favorite example of this is if you think of the grade, right? So the grade was invented in 1788 by a man named William Farish. Prior to 1788, No one ever used a grade at school. No one ever assessed anyone's thinking along those. If you told Thomas Jefferson, this kid's essay is a C+, this kid's is a D, he's like, how can you compare people's thoughts? That's not what we do here. What are you talking about? But as you use that tool, you say, what is the worldview of that tool? The worldview of that tool is basically reify, quantify, rank. I cannot give you a grade unless I know what I'm talking about. So reification is the act of turning ethereal things into concrete nouns, like love. Love is not a thing, but reification says, no, if we're going to talk about love, we need to be able to, it is this and nothing else. So what do grades reify? Knowledge, basically understanding. If we want to give you a grade on history, your knowledge becomes a reified entity. Why would you want to reify things like creativity, critical thinking? Because then you can assign a value to it. That's a 9 out of 10. That's a 8 out of 10. Why would you do that? Because then you can rank them. You can now say with seeming objectivity, that kid is smarter than that kid. That kid is more creative or funnier than that kid. Today, when people realize, look, that's the grade made us think that's what school is for. We are here to reify, quantify, and rank learning so kids can get into university or whatever it's for. Most people can't see past it. They go, yeah, of course that's what we're here for, without ever recognizing that, no, that's what the tool has demanded we do in this situation. Go back to before the tool existed, we were still doing school. We just had a completely different way of viewing it. So when you get stuck in that worldview, and I'm stuck in it too, man, I'm not throwing anyone under the bus here, you don't even recognize anymore what you've lost or what you've changed or how definitions have moved. To you, that's all it's ever been. And I think we're living in a moment of that right now, right? Reading on a screen is incredibly difficult. Most people don't do it. What we do when we get on a screen is we just start skimming. It does not work with how the brain likes to process language or anything else. Cool. If we skim when we're on a screen, the SATs recently changed their reading comprehension section. When we took reading comprehension tests growing up, it was, here's like a passage of 750 words. Here's a couple of questions about that passage. Off you go. Now it is, here's a sentence of 75 words. Here's one question about that sentence. Next. Here's another question of 75 words. Here's one question about that sentence. Next. They have redefined reading comprehension to mean skimming. Can you pull out one key idea from one sentence? And I recognize that. You recognize that. We're at a point of switch where the people who are older are like, that's not reading comprehension. But watch, if we don't do anything about it, in 20 years, that will be reading comprehension. That will be how we define it. That will be what everyone thinks it is. It's skimming and pulling out words. So as the deeper we get into each tool, we don't even notice we're in there anymore. Our definitions change. And as far as we're concerned, that's what it always was. And hopefully these kind of conversations can help us step back and go, no, that's not what it always was. And we get to decide, what do we want from our kids rather than what are our kids doing? All right, that's what we're going to do from now on.
Health isn't just one thing, it's everything working together. And one of the fastest growing areas in health and wellness is integrated health, the middle ground between fitness and rehab. People who follow this path see real long-term results, and this field provides amazing opportunities for those looking for a career change or upgrade. The Chek Institute has been educating Chek practitioners for over 30 years. They learn a step-by-step system that integrates advanced assessments, functional movement, and lifestyle coaching as a unified approach, allowing them to help their clients find lasting success that simply can't be achieved by just following a single pathway. But sometimes getting started on a new path can be challenging. That's why we created the new Chek Integrated Health Foundation program, building on Paul Chek's system that's been refined for over 30 years and practiced by more than 70,000 Chek-trained professionals worldwide. It's self-paced with lifetime access, community, payment plans, and limited time bonuses. When you complete it, you'll be able to run a complete client process, screen lifestyle factors, assess movement, design client-centered plans, and deliver a high-end service session after session so your work becomes referable, respected, and built to last. So whether you're looking for a career change and wanting a roadmap, or you're a fitness trainer tired of commoditized sessions, Or maybe a medical professional frustrated by poor follow-through between appointments. The new Chek Integrated Health Foundation program can help you find success and fulfillment. Go to paul.chekinstitute.com/Spirit Gym to learn more about the brand new Chek Integrated Health Foundation program.
Well, I think one of the things that's important for me as a parent and an educator, I've been a teacher for a very long time. I come from a family of teachers. I think that what's really, really important is to help a person identify what I call, what is your dream? Arnold Mindell, a famous psychologist who started a system called process psychology and had advanced training in Jungian psychology and mathematics and science, and he was a shaman, did research on children and found that 70% of children who stated what their dream was between age 5 and 7 actually ended up in that profession.
Yeah.
So that's the point is, if we can help people identify what is it that you're passionate about, what is it you love to do, and then we can help them start being aware of, and parents giving them the things that help them develop those skills and awarenesses, the chances are good they're going to be inspired to learn and inspired to engage and grow. Now, as a side note, I'll tell you something kind of strange and funny, because one of my buddies, Jason Picard, is a process psychologist, and he's been on my podcast several times. He's one of the smartest guys you'll ever meet, and most successful. And so he was saying, well, my childhood dream was to be a magician and a drummer. And so he became a successful stockbroker, but he's also a very good drummer, and he still loves magic. I've reflected back on my childhood dreams, and the strangest thing is, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a bank robber. Now,
nice.
I don't know. I have to figure out what that really means, but I always thought
that'd be the coolest profession.
Because I thought, that'll force me to really have to get good at what I do. And the reward is you get the money and they're all insured. So you're not really, no one's going to lose. And the challenge is you get thrown in prison. So from an early age, my mindset was, I've got to challenge myself really at a high level, and I'll get rewarded at a high level, but the punishment for not being the best will be equally of magnitude to the reward. And so, of course, I founded an institute in holistic health. So maybe in some ways I'm still robbing the bank, if you get the metaphor.
Isn't it? I'm going to say, now you shouldn't have said it, because now if there's ever a bank robbed around you in California, everyone's going to be like, well, we got our suspect.
Listening.
But I think you make kind of an interesting point, which got me thinking, is, so when it comes to engagement with learning, aspiration is key.
Yeah.
Kids who have a reason, that's like, a lot of people are like, how do we get kids engaged with stuff? It really does at a huge level boil down to aspiration. What is your goal? Like me, I'm really into the brain. Now, because of that, if I'm hanging out with my father-in-law who loves to talk about cars, I don't know the first thing about cars, doesn't interest me in the least, but I am interested because maybe something he's about to say can give me some insight into this. I don't know where the next big idea is going to come from. Someone's talking about birds. I'm like, let me pay attention. That might be the answer I've been looking for.
That's how I think. Cross-pollination.
That's it. So I think on one level, aspiration becomes key for engagement for learning, or at least a big driver of it. But this leads me down, and I don't have an answer for this. It's just me thinking out loud. Is the function of a K through 12 education then to help each kid meet their aspiration? Or is the function of a K through 12 education to have a single aspiration, like to pump out an American citizen, whatever that might mean, whatever these values are? So I don't know where education sits on that. I think if you'd have asked people 200 years ago, they'd have said, no, we're not here to help kids fulfill their dream. We're here to build a society. But maybe today that has become the function of a school, is to help kids recognize what they desire and then fight for that. In which case, maybe a K through 12 general education isn't the best. The way it's structured now isn't the best way to go about that. And that's where maybe alternate schools and stuff come in. I don't know. Just a clash of kind of what I think original purpose versus current purpose might come in.
One of the things that brings up in me that I think is a really important thing to put on the table is that we've lost on a general scale the pursuit of mastery at almost anything.
Oh yeah.
You know, like I when I was a young man growing up, I was a boxer and a kickboxer, and at least 6 of my buddies had achieved black belt in different martial arts, some of them 2 or 3 different styles. And they loved the combative arts. They were passionate about it. They read books about it. They studied it. They wanted to win competitions. And these guys achieved mastery. I personally have invested the time and the energy to achieve mastery in the areas of my life that were most interesting to me, matched my passions, and I felt were important because in some way it was related to how I made a living. And I never wanted to be, you know, I grew up in a house where my parents always fought about money. So as a young man, I thought, I'm going to do what I have to do to make sure I have plenty of money, because I hate living in an environment where there's not enough money, because it leads to pain. It leads to family trauma. It leads to insecurity. And so from an early age, when I was racing motocross, I wanted to master it. When I was racing stock cars, I wanted to master it. And the first thing I did is hunt around to say who wins the most races, who are the best mechanics, who are the best martial artists, who are the best boxing coaches. And I always went after and sought out the best people to learn from. And that's how I built my entire career. And the point I'm making is if we're not careful, if we don't support young people and help them identify something that they're passionate enough and their heart's in enough to achieve mastery, then we're going to get exactly what we've got right now. Washing machines that break down constantly, but they're brand new. We bought a brand new stove. Thing was giving us trouble. We had to have the repairman come and fix major aspects of it. We spent $14,000 on a Viking refrigerator to replace the old one that was 25 years old. And within the first 3 months, it was freezing everything and had major problems. And it took us almost a year to get them to fix the fucking thing. Yeah. Yet it's a $14,000 refrigerator. And on it goes. I've had to put 5 pumps in my well because the pumps keep getting assembled improperly. And they say it's because during COVID, they lost all their primary workers and only the people they could get to come to work were X, Y, and Z, and they couldn't build pumps. So now they're telling me I've got to pay for the pump because they can't afford to pay for more pumps. But it's their fucking fault because they don't have anybody that has any mastery. So the question I'm proposing to everybody is, what happens when you fill a world full of people that are half-assed at everything, don't have any passion, don't have the discipline to achieve mastery at anything, and yet the only people that are really disciplined in achieving mastery are the psychopaths controlling everything above us that start wars and run AI systems and trick you into COVID vaccinations.
And look how they talk about it too. I think very interesting. Everything you just said. I'm working on a documentary on genius. Where does genius come from? Is it born? Is it made? How does it all kind of fit together? And the one thing you'll see from any genius, intense and utter mastery of a very specific field. They did not, you don't see Picasso's first original Picasso painting until after he's 11 years worth of studying with the best people. You don't see Frank Lloyd Wright's first original home till 14 years after he starts studying under subtle. That's what we do. We drill and we master one thing. And by the way, you made another great point is if you look at bloodlines of, say, Nobel Prize winners. Let's just use Nobel Prize as our proxy for cool. You're a genius. There's almost no bloodline whatsoever. But genius is not related to your blood, to your family. But there are massive bloodlines when you look at mentorships. If you go back to like the original Nobel Prize winners, their students will win the next round of Nobel Prize, and their students will win the next. It's the best of the best. Seek out the best. They learn from them. They study under them. They drill. Tutelage is key. You have to earn the right to make something good. I think today there's been an argument going around. There's books written about it that breadth is more important than depth. It only takes you 70%. Like you do most of your learning in the first 70% of anything. So just learn something for about 3 months and you're fine. But you don't realize breadth is only as good as the depth. The deepest you know one thing, That's the only use any breath is ever going to have for you. If you are a mile wide and an inch deep across everything, you got nothing. You're no better than an AI chatbot. But if you're a mile wide and a mile deep in at least one thing, you now have something to anchor all that stuff to. So breadth comes after depth if you really want kind of creativity. So you're absolutely right. Mastery is key, but we're being told we don't need it. Psychologists, neuroscientists are saying, no, breadth is the answer without recognizing that, no, we've never in history seen anyone with breadth and no depth. Like my favorite is there's one dude who's won a Nobel Prize in 3 different fields. He's the only guy who's won it in 3 fields. And his student, who is now the world's foremost expert on genius, go figure, that's how they all work together, asked him, hey, how did you do that? And he said, it's the same idea 3 different ways. I only have one idea. I've only ever had one idea. That's my mastery. It just so happened I could adapt it for economics. I could adapt it for medicine, but it's the same idea. That's where breadth becomes meaningful, when you have depth enough in at least one field that you can start to blow that out. But now go to exactly what you said, is like Zuckerberg and Bill Gates. All these people are basically telling kids, you do not need to go to school. You do not need to do the work. You can immediately become genius now. You can use our tools to create whatever you want now, without also divulging that these people graduated from Ivy League universities. These people who are telling you don't have to be a master are the masters of their field. Bill Gates.
Well, they're also in bed with DARPA, so you need to consider that.
They got a lot of money, but that's where Bill Gates was the only, like, I think he was one of maybe 3 kids in the US who had access to a certain mainframe at the time. He wasn't magic in telling kids, you don't need to do what I did. Yes, they do need to do exactly what you did. You put in the hard yards, and everyone else does too. But I think you're right. That's kind of the story going around right now. Education is broken because kids learn too much stuff. They don't need to master anything. And you're right. If you don't, people want to be famous now. Maybe that's a problem of our generation, right? I was telling my wife about this the other day. I think the biggest problem of our generation was scale. Was if you were the best barber in our generation, and I'm a very, very early millennial, late Gen Z, early millennial, you were not good enough unless you owned every barber store in the state. If you were a good chef, you weren't good enough unless the whole country knew your name. Our generation was basically, you're a failure unless you have scaled everywhere. And when you have to scale everywhere, that's when depth, you can't spend 25, 30 years learning one field before you begin impacting it. You need to start at 20. Changing things up. And I think that was one of our big problems. So for our daughter, the next generation, we're moving to Italy at the end of this year, and she's going to a nature school. She's going to be outdoors. There will not be tech. And people say, well, how is she going to succeed? I said, on our scale, she's not, but I don't want her to succeed on our scale. I want her to be the best at what she can do in whatever. If she lives in one village for the rest of her life, God bless her. We have this mistaken assumption that if you're not changing the world, then you're pointless in our generation. And I'm like, I hate that. And so maybe that's why a lot of people don't have time for depth, because they need to be famous first. I don't know what the heck that all means.
Well, yeah, that's a psychological issue. I could expand on that greatly, but it's a problem. Leonard Sachs, MD, has lots of stuff on what's happening to young people in that regard. But there's 3 things that I've wanted to share with you as I was listening. One, we have a saying for people with a lot of breadth and no depth, and you've heard it 1,000 times: jack of all trades, master of none.
Yeah.
That means you will be working for a minimal wage for the rest of your life. A master, by definition, is someone who has the respect of his profession, can charge whatever he wants to because he is a master, and people will come from around the world. People come from all over the world for my help because I have mastered my craft. And, I'm a holistic health practitioner with a 9th grade education, and I charge $750 an hour. That would have been considered impossible to do. The most common words I heard from my school teachers, Jared: Paul, you will never amount to anything.
They literally said that to you?
Oh, absolutely. If I had a nickel for every time I heard that, I'd have been a rich man before I left junior high school.
That's
and why? Because I asked
questions
that they didn't want to answer. and I can think.
And again, maybe school isn't there to tell kids if they're going to succeed or fail. Maybe school should be there to mold an outcome. I don't know, but that breaks my heart and does my head in, that a teacher would feel, well, you're struggling here in 9th grade math, therefore you're going to fail the rest of your life. It's like, I don't know that that's our job. Come on.
Listen, before my mother became a yogi when I was 12, she was a Christian.
Yeah.
And I used to walk out of Christian sermons utterly confused and concerned. In one breath, you're telling me God loves me. And in the next breath, you're saying God will burn you in hell for breaking this long list of rules. And then you're telling me that God is everything. And I'm saying, well, if God is everything, then God's burning itself in hell. How does that work? I was scared that adults fell for this crap.
Yeah.
I used to be worried. I used to literally say to God, what did I do to deserve to be here? Have I fucked up something really bad? So that's my one concern. The other
I
one
would
is,
add, I want to throw on the back of that too, Paul, is a lot of people forget the derivation of art is skill. Art comes from the Latin ars, which is skill. Art was never thought of as this big ethereal, magical God touched you, you're good at it. Art was always the most skilled person will create the thing worth looking at. And so it goes right back to your...
Exactly. And that's why a work of art, I remember the first time I drove an Audi, I'm like, what the fuck? Who would ever drive an American car after having an Audi? I mean, I have my Audi A3 that I bought in 2007, a 2-liter engine that puts out 200 fucking horsepower and gets as good a gas mileage as my motorcycle. And I'm like, it drives like a fucking Swiss watch. It handles like hell. I'm like, who in the fuck would drive an American car after one ride in an Audi? That's
art is skill.
A work of art. A Rolex is a work of art. A work of art is anything that's beautiful, efficient, effective, awesome,
which comes from skill. You do not get to beautiful, skills. Efficient, awesome, unless you deeply know what it is you're doing.
Which leads to my next point. Once you develop mastery at one thing, you know the steps to mastery. And in my life, I can tell you, because I mastered physical exercise, for example, I mastered human movement. Then when I wanted to master, let's say, the use of plant medicines for therapeutic healing, I knew the steps. Once you go through the process of mastery, you have an inherent knowledge how you begin to learn. Who do you go get help from and guidance from? How much practice does it take? What do you have to practice? What are your own measures of determining whether or not you're demonstrating authentic knowledge, skill, and wisdom? But if you don't master something once, then you are a leaf in the wind and you're dependent upon somebody else to tell you how good or not good you are. And that's a dangerous, dangerous situation. And the third thing I wanted to share is I've studied the biographies of over 150 of the world's greatest thinkers because I wanted to learn early in my career, how did they do it? If they can do it, I can do it. That was my belief. It's always been my belief.
Yeah.
And so I studied them, and I've also studied a lot of millionaires and billionaires because I want to see how they think. And one of the things that's come up at least 2 times in my studies are surveys showing that when they analyze millionaires and above to billionaires and evaluate how many of them graduated from high school versus didn't, more millionaires did not graduate from high school than millionaires that did.
Yeah.
So that tells you that they didn't get their thinking processes so structured and shaped by somebody else that their field of perception was too narrow and they can see opportunities where other people cannot see them. And then they achieve mastery at making that happen. Yeah. And so I think we have to be conscious that even if you look at it from a financial perspective, if you have good grades but no mastery, you're probably not going to achieve a high level of financial success. Only 1% of the U.S. population makes more than $100,000 a year.
Is that true?
That's what the last time I did research on it. Yeah, that was the cutoff line. 100,000 a year, only 1% of the U.S. population. And this was probably 15 years ago. I did that research.
Yeah.
But if you just take the 100,000 from 15 years ago and do the math on the
whatever the inflation would be
of inflation,
yeah,
it might be 200,000 a year now. But it brings me to a story I want to tell you. You know, I was in the 82nd Airborne Division. I trained the Army boxing team, but I hated the fact that as a paratrooper, I did not have permission to explore, ask questions, and identify whether the people I was going to be sent off to kill had actually done anything to threaten the United States of America. And so from a spiritual perspective, I found that I could not kill somebody that I did not know was a legitimate threat. And because I could not ask those questions because of rank and the way the military runs, I felt from a spiritual perspective that if I had to go kill people and later found out that it was just the United States ripping off resources and playing shell games, I couldn't live with myself. So I had a lot of success as the trainer of the Army boxing team. I fought on the boxing team before I became the trainer. But the point is, when it came time for my 3 years in the military to end, all your seniors know that it's time for you to, so they come try to get you to what's called re-up, to sign for another contract. And so the boxing coaches said, Paul, look, we'll get you a promotion. You can kind of just keep doing what you're doing. You'll have it great here. I looked at, there's 3 of them. I had a meeting with all 3 head coaches. I looked at them. I said, look, 3 years from now, I will be making more than a general in the Army makes. And the only way I could do that in the military would be go get a college degree. And then it takes the average guy about 30 years to become a general. Yeah. I will make general wages in 3 years. Jared, 3 years to the day, I made $108,000 that year.
Yeah.
A general at that time, a 1-star general, was making $90,000 a year. And that, my friend, is having a clear sense of direction, a clear sense of personal value, and not staying in some organization to suck on the hind tit, hoping a fictitious mommy and daddy will always put food on the plate and I'll be a pawn to some game that people like Donald Trump and the globalists are playing, and not ask questions about who I'm killing with advanced weaponry.
Yeah.
And I think I tell that story for everybody listening, especially young people. You can get caught in a corporate ideology. You can get caught in a military ideology. You can become very childlike and subservient to people that have so-called rank and authority. But if you don't think for yourself and have a dream big enough to live for, then you'll always settle for something average. And Carl Jung said the average man can never be successful. And that's just a fact, because the average man's not a master at anything.
I would like, and I would, that's why we always say too, you can do anything you want. I've never had a problem believing that, saying it, but that doesn't mean you can do everything. And I think that's an important thing is
true.
You can do anything you want to, there's not enough time in the world to do it all.
No.
So if you want to master something, that is necessarily going to take time away from you mastering something else. And that's fine. You can still do it. You just got to reckon. I think some people want their cake and to eat it too. And it's like, well, no, it took 2 decades to get really good at neuroscience, but I could have spent that time learning to drum. Like you said, now I can pick up drumming now if I wanted to. As an adult, I have my choice, but we're all going to die at some point. So you can't do everything. You got to pick and choose what is going to be most important to you.
That's why listening to your heart is so important.
Yeah.
You know, if the head's in it, but the heart's not in it, you'll never make it to mastery.
Yeah.
There has to be a deep passion and commitment.
That's why go to Napoli and watch these craftsmen. They just got their one little stall and they're just whittling wood and they're selling wood to tourists. I'm like, geez, you are better at this than anyone else. And they do that in a minute. Like, oh, you haven't even seen our good stuff. And when they take you back to show you what they really care about, what they do, it's just incredible. So that's why, for my daughter, I'm like, if you master something small, that's okay. Your dream doesn't have to be billionaire living in a penthouse in New York. Your dream can be, I got a wife, I got kids, I own my own house. And you know what? I enjoy my craft. Every single day I go in there and I do something that's unique and fun for me. That's a beautiful dream to me.
I think young people, everybody should read the second book of the Tao by Stephen Mitchell, because he talks about how mastery is achieved in there. And I won't elaborate now for time's sake, because there's lots of things I want to talk to you about. But the second book of the Tao by Stephen Mitchell, pay attention to when he starts talking about the chef, and when he starts talking about the guy that could carve bell stands, and it'll be obvious when you're there. The next thing I want to bring on the table here is, I know that for a number of years now, schools have been dropping physical education for students. And when I investigated this, the most common reason I heard from school teachers and school administrators is that schools did not have the budget to run the physical education department and pay for all the computers they needed for a more modern education. If this is true, it's very clear to me that those making these decisions are dangerously uneducated on what education is and what aspects of education are crucial for the development of young adults. Now, if you've been studying the brain, then you should also have an awareness that the brain and the body are really one thing. In fact, what you call your skin is actually the sensory pole of your brain. And embryologically, the brain and the skin are the same thing. So your brain's actually covering your whole body. And I could give you a long talk about how the brain and the body are one.
Yeah.
But the point I'm making is, when we've got education departments, education systems and schools cutting physical education out to buy computers, it's a sign to me that you do not understand education at the most fundamental level, and you don't understand that cognitive performance and physical health are as interlinked as water and wet are.
Absolutely.
I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
And your response is, so I talk a lot about kind of divesting from digital technology in schools. And one of the big questions that I always get asked is how. Like, I was working with a school in Australia. They said, well, we did the math. It's going to take us like $150,000 if we start printing everything out. And if we get textbooks, we're up to $250,000. How are we going to do that? Where are we going to get that money? And you forget. So I said, well, let's do ourselves a little audit, shall we? How much money per year are you spending on technology, tech upkeep, and subscriptions to programs that nobody is using? I'm not even talking about the useful stuff, the stuff that is just collecting dust. So he goes away, he spends about a month doing his audit. He comes back, he goes, we're spending $950,000 a year on nothing. I said, yep, there is your money. It's you forget that when we talk about divesting, moving away from tech, you get that money back. You recoup that, and now you can reinvest it in things that genuinely matter. So if you can't afford gym class because of tech, get rid of the tech. Now you can afford gym class. If we can't afford gym class or music class because of tech, get rid of tech. Now you can afford music class. And as a bonus, you're also going to boost learning in all the other classes that you're not going to have tech in. It's a win-win for everyone. And I think you make a very good point. But I always I skirt this very slightly differently than you. Exercise is good because it does boost cognition. Music is good because it does boost cognition. Art is good because it does boost cognition. But I never liked those arguments. So you're telling me, and this is what I'm not saying you specifically, but someone will say, we need art because, or music class because it helps kids be better at math. That's their argument for keeping it. And I said, no, man, art for the sake of art is why you keep art. Exercise for the sake of exercise is why you keep exercise. Music for the sake of music is why you keep music. The bonus is that it will also improve learning and performance in other areas, but you don't use that as the measure for its worth. If we keep music class and kids don't do better at math, do we now drop music class? No, you recognize that music is as much a part of a flourishing soul as anything else is going to be. So when a school say, where are we going to get all this funding? Just remember the sheer amount of money. Here's one of my favorite. There's a group, I'm not going to use the name. I don't know who's going to get in trouble or not. There's a government program that was earmarked for about $42 billion about 15 years ago. And it was to get high-speed internet and tech into schools, to get kids access to tech. Now, they still have about $21 billion left. They did their job. they're trying to figure out how to use that $21 billion to now get tech out of schools. And I just find that, like, I'm with them. I'm going to help them out as much as I can, but I just think it's hilarious that that's the cycle we're on, that no one stopped and asked, why are we doing this? Is it useful? Is it beneficial? They just did it because tech was the future. And now that they realize it's harming them, they're going to cycle themselves back out of it. And that will have been, if all up, $42 billion of taxpayers' dollars. I mean, over the course of decades, so it's not a huge hit, but putting something in and then taking out and then washing their hands and saying success. And I wish, couldn't we have started 15 years ago, just stopping and saying, what is learning? What is development? What do we need for it to occur? And are these tools going to be the answer? And if the answer is no, then boy, I just saved you $42 billion.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to expand on some of the comments you've just made. I'm going to make some points. When I teach physical education to people, which I have to do all the time, basic physical human movement, one of the things, and I have to work with a lot of elite athletes, because what happens is they get very specific imbalances due to the sports that they play. Tennis players always swinging the racket predominantly with one hand, or boxers that are left-handed and can't fight southpaw. Golfers that swing the club billions of times in one direction but not the other. It creates huge structural problems and leads to injuries and pathologies that I end up having to address with them. And so one of the things that I talk about when I'm teaching Chek professionals how to teach exercises, we have to use a wide variety of exercises that incorporate complex movements, all three planes of movement, frontal, sagittal, transverse, because we need the body to develop a good motor vocabulary. If you don't have a good motor vocabulary, your nervous system will not know how to respond quickly when there's a threat in the environment. For example, if somebody does not have enough exposure to walking on uneven terrain, their righting and tilting reflexes will be too subdued, so they're likely to sprain their ankle very easily. But if you've spent time walking in the mountains, walking on trails, using wobble boards, balance boards, and apparatus that activate those pathways, they become very efficient and you're less likely to get injured. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about right now is what I call skills transfer. Now I'll say, okay, well, we don't want to put too much physical education in class because it takes time away from developing language skills. I'm just making an argument to make a point. Okay, and I say, okay, you're an expert at language. Good, I have a question for you. What % of language is verbal versus posture and gesture, which is movement? Well, it turns out to be 55% of all communication is posture and gesture, and only 45 of it is actually the spoken word. So if you have kids that don't exercise, don't know how to use their body, they're going to have shitty posture, which means they have restricted capacity to move their body, which also turns out to be restricted capacity to solve problems. And it'll also affect their creativity because they're dumbed down. So the point I'm making is, if you're an artistic genius, then the same type of creative thinking that makes a Picasso also makes a mechanic that can think out of the box. Because if you take a kid with artistic skills and say, okay, now I'm going to teach you auto mechanics, they already have the inherent creativity to think outside of the box. If we look at what are the things that it takes to make a healthy, well-rounded person, this is why Carl Jung said many times, it's not important to be perfect, but it is important to be well-rounded. If we could identify what are the basic skills, which is exactly why Confucius wanted people to have a classic education. So they had this ability to see the world through poetry, through art, through mathematics, through logical reasoning, so they could debate, so that they could create. You can develop skills transfer, but if we have a bunch of geniuses at iPhones that can't exercise and don't know what real food is, don't speak because they use text messages, we don't have a snowball's chance in hell of solving the challenges that we face in the world right now.
And that was kind of going back to what you were talking about. So people say, well, cool. All kids need now are digital skills, digital literacy skills. We can test digital literacy skills, and digital literacy is way low right now. Between 2013 and 2023, the percentage of kids who are even competent when it comes to measuring digital literacy has dropped 21%, despite the fact that over 570% we've increased in the amount of time and usage kids spend on computers all day, every day at school. So we got ourselves a problem. Oh, my wife is sneaking out here. And the problem is, it looks like when we train them on tools, they become worse at the tools. Why? Because the concept of literacy is exactly what you said. Literacy isn't the ability to use a tool. When I went to film school as my undergrad, and we didn't get to touch film equipment till our junior year. And we were all mad about that. We're like, come on, we're here to make films. And the argument they gave us, and at the time I didn't believe them, but I do now, was an idiot with a camera is still an idiot. We're here to
Amen.
We're here to teach you how to think through the medium of film, how to think through this knowledge so that when you learn the tool, you have something to say with the tool. That's literacy. Literacy is recognition of connections, of patterns. How do things fit together?
Yeah.
That's what a general education has always been. We are not a tools-based institution. We have been, the operative word is general. We're here to teach you history, not because you're going to be a historian, but because you're learning how to think through knowledge, to recognize patterns. We're teaching you writing, not because you're going to be a novelist, because we're teaching you how to think. A good rule of thumb I always tell my kids is teach a kid how to use a tool, they'll be able to use that tool, but nothing else. Like if you go to TAFE and you study welding for 2 years, you will be a great welder, but no one will expect you to be a good plumber or a good gardener. Doesn't mean you can't be, it just means you didn't train for it. Now imagine the field of welding expands and there's new tools. We will also expect you to drop because I trained you on the wrong tools. Sorry, you're not ready for this next phase. When we make school about teaching kids tech and digital literacy and focusing every class on tech, they will be good at using that tool. But when we return to a deeper, broader education that says, no, I'm teaching you how to think and learn, now you will be able to use any tool, adapt to any tool. AI is the greatest example of that. I cannot tell you how many conferences I've gone to, educational conferences, with somebody telling us about how important it is for kids to learn how to use AI. They need to learn how to use AI. Here's how you do it. Here's how you plug it into your class. I am always the first one with my hand up at the end when they ask for questions. And my question is always, how old are you? And their answer is inevitably, oh, I'm 36, I'm 37, I'm 41. I go, cool. How did you ever learn how to use AI? I mean, no one ever explicitly taught it to you. How did you ever figure it out? Maybe because your K through 12 general education taught you how to solve problems. We don't need to teach you how to use the tool if you can learn how to think. And now you're telling me I shouldn't teach my kids how to think. I should teach them the tool, and that's going to make them lesser than you. So realistically, this is where I come back, is our general knowledge, our general thinking, our ability to recognize patterns. That's what K through 12 does. After that, you then pick a mastery, you drill down, you master that. And as you said, once you have mastery in one thing, you now know the pattern. You have metacognition. Let it rip. Go somewhere else if you want to. Keep drilling or go somewhere else.
So important. And thank you for this conversation, Jared. Like what we're talking about might be one of the most important things anyone could be talking about right now. When you consider what we're talking about, I mean, we're talking about the future of humanity, the survivability of humanity. I don't need to tell you, you're an expert at education. But
sometimes you forget it. Sometimes the more I teach it, I worked clinically for a long time, and you would realize every about 6 months or so, you no longer saw patients, you just saw data and stats, and you had to reset and go, wait a second, what am I doing here? What is my bigger? And I think you're right. With education, we can get lost in the nuances of pedagogy and the data. And every once in a while, you're right. It's right to step back and go, wait, what are we actually talking about? We're talking about the development of the next generation, the future. What we do now determines what will happen going forward forever. So what are we willing to do now? I think it's a really good point to hit up.
The thing that is very concerning to me is our education system, in my observation, is not producing people that have good problem-solving abilities. But we're now at a point where we have created at least 50 problems that could lead to a complete crisis of life. I could list many of them, from toxicity, from a lack of biodiversity, to a loss of insects and bees, to the overuse of chemicals and the poisoning of nature and humanity, to world wars, to EMF pollution, to spiritual crisis, to health crisis. I mean, it's like it is a testament to nature that due to her diversity, she can withstand the loss of common sense in her offspring, and hopefully give us a chance to pull our heads out of our fourth point of contact, as we used to say in the Army.
Our fourth point of contact. I like that.
Well, the reason it's called the fourth point of contact is because when you jump out of a airplane in a parachute, there's 4 points of contact. That 1, 2, 3, 4, your feet, the side of your lower leg, your thigh, and your butt is the fourth point of contact. So
okay,
when they say in the Army, get your head out of your fourth point of contact, it's just a military way to say to get your head out of your ass. Which is exactly where it'll end up if your chute doesn't open. But like if we don't right now start producing young people with really good problem solving skills, they're coming to a cul-de-sac that we've created, and they have no idea how to deal with the monsters waiting for them there.
Yeah.
And like this, like if you love your children, then you should be very passionate about their education.
And if you bring it back, it's an interesting finding is every culture gets the genius they cultivate. Basically,
Yes.
Whatever is important in your society, that will be the genius you get. So it's not magic that the Belle Epoque in France, you got all painters, because that was what was meaningful then. During the Renaissance, you got sculptors. That was what was meaningful to them. You got all the greatest poets came out of like 12th century China. That was their culture. So you look at today's culture and you say, well, what geniuses are we cultivating? YouTube stars. What is important to our culture right now is fame. So it's no surprise that kids are spending their energy and time to getting recognition and fame. And beyond that, you would say it's tech.
Yeah.
So the highest salaries in history of mankind are being paid right now for people to basically use tech to build addictive habit cycles. They don't even hide it. There was a time when they pretended like, oh, we're an altruistic company. We really care about the people. It is called the attention economy. It is first and foremost of all they do now. We need to invent ways to keep your eyes on our product. That is how we make money. Best way to do that is through addiction cycles. Sweet. Imagine the problems we can now take any kid, by the way, who's going K through 12, and you're asking, what do you aspire to do? If any of them have any interest in wealth, they're going to aspire to get into tech. Why? Because that's where the money is going to be. Now, when everyone is gunning towards tech, all the solutions to the problems you just outlined are going to be tech-based. And so we can't be surprised when somebody says, well, the planet is dying. What are we going to do? We're going to go to another planet.
Well,
that's your solution.
That's your solution. And I always say to people that say that to me, because it comes up all the time, I go, I want you to actually ask yourself a couple of key questions. How many fucking people get on that rocket?
Mm-hmm.
How many dollars will it cost to ride the rocket? And what are you going to eat when you get there? What are you going to breathe? And have you considered the temperature at that location?
Think of how asinine that is. That's like saying my wife is sick. That's okay. Go get another one. That's not really how this works.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly the metaphor for how stupid that is.
Yeah. So that's where I kind of go, look, if we want to get kids out of that rat wheel and get them solving problems at a deeper level, we need to start honoring socially different things. We have to stop okay, my guess is everyone has watched either the Oscars or the Grammys or one of those shows in the last couple of years. Who here knows a single Nobel Prize winner in the last couple of years? There's no reason to say we can't advertise the Nobel Prize winners as much as we do the movie stars, but we have made our selection to say this is going to be more important than this. So the whole next generation thinks that's all that matters. How do we realign our own values to highlight, look, we are looking for something different in the next generation, and we will get the genius we cultivate. So if we can start to, as adults now, start to cultivate different things in our house, we're not going to talk about Taylor Swift. We're going to talk about, I don't know, this scientist, or we're going to talk about this happening over here, or this development or invention over here, whatever it's going to be. I'm not going to set anyone down any path, but I think collectively we have to say we still have a say in what they're going to be interested in. And as long as we just filter that down, either tech or entertainment, we're going to get tech and entertainment geniuses. We're going to get really good singers. I love singers as much as the next guy, but I don't know that that's what we need from the next generation is more singers. But that could just be me being, old man.
No, you're not that old. God, what are you, 40?
I'm 43. I'm getting there.
43. I got a 46-year-old son, man.
You keep him busy.
Yeah. Look, I'm going to tell you, since you mentioned Taylor Swift, that chef and maybe I have two wives, one of my wives and the kids were talking about Taylor Swift. And I said, who's Taylor Swift? And they all looked at me like, you don't know who Taylor Swift is? I said, no, but just by the name, I can already tell it's probably not the kind of music I would listen to.
I'm going to listen, yo.
But it was just, they all thought it was funny that I didn't know who Taylor Swift is. But
can you imagine there was a time when an entire generation of kids would have known the greatest physicist at the time? There was a time when, and that's when physics, there was a time when the generation of kids would have known the best poet. And so they're going to pump out poets. I think now you've got what? The next generation of kids will know the richest person. I guess.
Well, I think if we're not careful, the next generation of kids will be living Hunger Games. That's where we're headed.
Isn't that weird? I was watching something earlier today on TV where they're just talking about median house prices and how they're going. And it's that even in Portland, which was once considered affordable, I don't know how anyone lives here. Basically, we're moving out. It's the most basic stuff as we celebrate these hyper rich individuals. It's coming at the expense of everyone else. And I don't know. We all just move to different places and then that becomes hyper expensive. And we move, how much more can we move around until something has to break? I guess.
Well, if you want to, if
trillions of dollars going to AI, but that's where I'm like, that's the zero sum game, right? I just had a debate with Sal Khan the other day where he's like, my tools, Khan Academy and Khan Migo and all these things can reach the masses. Kids who have no chance to have a teacher will now have a teacher. And I say, cool. How much does your nonprofit make a year? Well, we're tens and hundreds of millions of dollars. Imagine if you reinvested that in teacher training.
Yeah.
Neil Postman nailed it. He said, look, the billions of dollars we spend on tech, I'm not saying kids won't learn. I'm not saying they can't benefit from it in some way. But imagine if those billions, what is the biggest problem with teachers right now? Overload. What if we spent those $1 billion on paying teachers better salaries, which would attract more teachers to the craft, which would then lessen the workload? We're spending the same amount of money, but now we're doing it down a path that we know is going to be beneficial for our kids, as opposed to investing it in at his time, an experiment that we don't know if it's going to work. And now 20 years since he's passed, we know it didn't work. Whoops, that he was 100% right.
I've been saying for years, if there's two groups of people we need to turn into cultural heroes, it's organic farmers and school teachers.
Yep.
They should have a huge increase in pay. They should be in a position of prestige. They should be revered and supported because those two are the two groups of people we can't live without.
Yeah.
Yep. It's that simple.
I would add nurses to that just because I think they do the bulk of work medically and they just get I think teachers, nurses, and organic farmers. I got no. Now imagine if the next generation was raised to want to farm. It's not magic. It's what culture are they being brought up in, and they're being told farm. They don't even know farms exist. You heard those stories about like the kids would go to a what do you call that? Not a fair, but the state farm, and be like, "What is this? How does this? Where we get wool? Is this like they didn't even understand that there's a process to how we get here."
There's the famous chef. Is it Jamie Oliver?
Jamie Oliver. Yeah.
Have you ever seen when he does demonstrations in front of large school audiences? He's got flashcards that are 50% farm animals and common fruits and vegetables, and 50% corporate logos. 100% of the children can tell them what every corporate logo is, but 50% of the children cannot identify common fruits, vegetables, and farm animals. That's the problem we're facing.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you hide, maybe go back, go to AI. In my estimation, the biggest problem with AI, ultimately, aside from the fact that it does nothing, is it's hidden its intellectual heritage. So AI is trained on, anytime anyone talks to AI, they're like, the AI said this. I said, no, humans said that. You just don't know who said it.
Yeah.
Because AI has worked so hard to appear human that it has erased any hint of citations or references or where it got its idea because it wants to appear human to you. But when you do that, you erase intellectual heritage. People assume that it's coming up with ideas on the fly. And now if you're a user of AI and you know no one will ever read your AI blogs, you assume you were the first one to come up with that idea. And now you get a whole generation of human beings who don't recognize the process by which we got to this stage. Who said it? It wasn't Francis Bacon. It wasn't Descartes either. But it was, if I've seen further, it's by standing on the shoulders of giants who came before me. That's an acknowledgement that, look, I climbed this mountain that all these other people built, and I am now at the pinnacle. I can see further. The next generation is going to have to climb above me. That's the effort it takes into getting to where we're at.
And notice
AI just says there is no mountain. I'm going to pick you up. I'm going to drop you right on the very top, and you're going to pretend everything.
Exactly. And notice
bring that back to food. Well, I was thinking that's like the same thing with food is if you don't know intellectual heritage, it's the same. If you don't know how farms work, if you don't know where animals, how they breed, where they come, what vegetables and fruits, you just open your eyes one day and there's food on your table. How much are you cutting out of that process that now, God forbid, if you don't understand what's happening and God forbid something crazy happens in the world, what are we stuck with? A bunch of people who
none
go
of
to
those
Target.
animals are confused about what their sex is either. We have a farm right here. You're talking to a guy sitting in the middle of a 14-acre farm for the specific purpose of making sure my kids know how reality works. But you said something that great people got there by standing on the shoulders of giants. I want to point out every one of those giants underneath the feet of the person saying those words was a master at something.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of them. Or they wouldn't have been standing on the shoulders of anybody. They would have still been figuring out how to get on the shoulders.
And that's that's why I tell my kids, in 10 years, your job is to tell me why I'm wrong. But it's not going to be easy. I'm not a pushover. You're going to have to fight and you're going to have to struggle. And then you're going to have to stand above me. Know what I know, and then you can figure out why I'm wrong. But if you don't know what I know, I'm going to be able to push back all day against counter arguments. So that's the development you have to go through.
You alluded to something earlier, which is, right now in social media and in the young children, there's this desperate desire for fame. And we have all the, kids doing everything they can to get more likes on Facebook or whatever, not to mention the dopamine hijacking that goes along with that. But as a person who's been studying psychology and has to deal with issues of behavior change all the time as a therapist, when I look at that from the lens of my knowledge and my experience, what you have points right back to the fact that children are not being effectively parented, because ultimately it's in the house that a child gets a sense of value, a sense of meaning, a sense of connection and belonging. And the more children leave home without that sense of connection, meaning, and value and belonging, the more desperate they are to get it. And when you hand them a piece of technology where you can Photoshop and make yourself have perfect tits and a perfect face and whatever else you want to do, and you can use AI to make you sound smart, and all of a sudden you've got 10,000 likes or all these comments, what you have now is the equivalent of when you go back to early research with people like B.F. Skinner. What happens if you take a chimpanzee baby away from its mother and give it a monkey made of wire that's not a living, it bonds to it. metaphor being, instead of a monkey made of wire, we're giving children's phones and televisions and video games. And so they learn, oh, if you want to be good at a video game, you got to get a higher score. If you want to be socially accepted, you got to get more likes, and you got to look a certain way and talk a certain way and behave a certain way. And that is a symptom of not having a sense of self that's developed through love, connection, parental guidance, and an effective education.
And I think you hit two big points there. One is the parenting, as you're right, is so Australia banned social media for kids under 16. I was just there last month. I teach there a lot. And so I got some of the inside scoop, and it's hilarious. Teachers are fine with it. Kids are fine with it. Schools are doing great. The people who are angry at it are parents. And the anger is they don't know what to do with their kids. The parents are basically saying, what am I supposed to do? We can go to a museum, but that's one day. What do I do the other 365 days? 64. But that's where I think we've outsourced parenting as well as everything else to the technology in a way that now we don't really remember what it means to sacrifice for your kid. That is the sacrifice, by the way, is the lack of time you have for your own endeavors, whether that's scrolling yourself or playing your own video games. It's lack of time to chase your own dreams in that moment, because your job is now to support and make sense of this other person. So it's interesting, if the best turnout of the social media ban in Australia is a return to analog parenting, that's probably the best news. And if it's a struggle to get there, great, but that's a great news. That's a great outcome for that. But I also go back to this kind of identity formation is, so during adolescence, especially, human beings always kind of farm out their identity during adolescence to varying degrees. But that's where during adolescence, you're trying to figure out who you are. So sometimes you dress like this group. Sometimes you use the language of this group. So one day you dye your hair red. The next day you don't do that anymore. I wear bell bottoms. Maybe I won't anymore. You're trying to find your group, your tribe. And to some level during adolescence, we always externalize our identity. That is the myth of Narcissus, though, by the way.
I know. And that's what's behind AI.
So that's where it gets worse. So people say, when I talk about Narcissus and kids being narcissistic, they think, oh, well, the myth of Narcissus, he fell in love with himself. No, he didn't fall in love with himself. He fell in love with a reflection of himself. The myth isn't about self-love. It's about externalizing your identity and only accepting that which is reflected back to you.
Yes.
And when Narcissus figured out, I'm not the reflection, I'm myself, he kills himself because the struggle of figuring out your own identity outside of any outside input was too much for him, and he kills himself. So it's about externalizing your identity. And it was so that idea has been around forever. And it's during adolescence really that you see it.
Yeah.
The internet hypercharged that problem, where exactly as you said, is now we have this system of thumbs up and likes and stars and pokes and whatever, which made it so easy for kids to start externalizing their identity. Now, as a teenager, I'm going to write a song. I'm going to put it online, and the song is neither good nor bad until you vote on it and come back to me. I'm going to paint this painting. I'm going to put it online. I neither like it nor dislike it till I figure out if you like it or dislike it. At least during that phase, now that's when things start going really bad, but at least during that phase, kids are still doing the work. At least the kid can still say, I wrote the song. I did the painting. Now with AI,
they're using AI.
They don't do anything. So now we have this system where they are not creating anything. They are putting it online. Other people are judging them, and they're forming their identity based off of that, when at no point have they even interacted personally with any of this material. I was talking to a psychologist at a university. She had this student that she was working with. Here's how she described it. He completely acknowledges that he used AI to write all his entrance exams and entrance essays and stuff. So he got in basically on AI. He uses AI to complete all of his assignments at school now. And he uses AI to interact with all of his classmates. He hasn't written an email in years. He just lets AI do it all. She said he didn't exist. I'm sitting here with a kid who can't figure out what's going wrong with his life. And it's because he doesn't exist. He's not here. At no point has he ever thought, acted, or done anything other than let another machine create for him, be judged on that output, and then assume that that's his identity.
That's exactly, Jared, what it means to be soulless.
And that is the path we are going down.
And that's exactly what the World Economic Forum has been telling us they're going to do.
It's like when the villain tells you, I am going to bomb your house, and no one pays attention. Everyone's like, no, you won't. And then he does, and everyone's mad that he did it. Yeah, that is their end game. They haven't hidden it. But I think out of altruism or something, we just don't want to believe that that's what they're doing, even when they flat out will tell us that's exactly what we're trying to do.
Well, I don't think most people are really equipped to face that magnitude of evil. I think that it there's the classic fight, flight, freeze reaction. I think it puts people into freeze, and I think that's one of the reasons that all the media channels are so full of all these serious burnings and bombings and riots. And it's just one, and the globalists are doing this. They're trying to keep people in freeze mode, just like they did with COVID while they installed 5G technology in schools all over the place, right? They used that freeze opportunity to put the digital control network into place, which they're still working on. But I want to go back to something you said earlier, because it's really important. You talked about how kids typically, especially when they go through puberty, deviate from their parents, dye their hair red, change their clothing, whatever. But that's true. And that's a necessary part of evolution. If kids just recapitulated their parents, then there would be no evolution. So there's a built-in need to reject mom and dad's viewpoint. And the other thing is parents have a lot of programming. By the time the kids are ready to leave home, mom and dad are often still living a generation behind. The kids without all the programming can actually see novel trends and new things much quicker than mom and dad. And all you got to do to prove that to yourself is just give a 35-year-old who hasn't used an iPhone and say, figure out how to use it. It'll make your life easier, and hand the same iPhone to a 6-year-old and see which one figures the iPhone out faster. It'll be hands down the 6-year-old, because my 6-year-old often has to show me how my iPhone works. Yeah. Even though we limit her exposure, she can see and figure it out like way faster than my mind can do it. Okay. Yeah. The point I want to bring on the table here, I was a teenager. There's lots of things about my parents. By the way, my parents wouldn't let us have a television on the farm. My father said, the reason you're not having a television is I don't want anything to distract you from your farm work. We run a farm, not a fucking TV studio. So they got a television the year I left home. It was black and white, only got the BBC News and one other channel, and you had to constantly move the aerials around because the signal would never stay stable. So I grew up without it. Yeah. But the thing that I really want to put the emphasis on here is, as much as my parents, like all of us, drove me crazy, when I got out into the world, there was something that they put into me that I didn't lose. Yeah. Values. My father was a very, very strict and painful guy to be around. If you didn't do a job right, you were going to get punished, and it would hurt. Yeah. And it might take you a week to 2 weeks to get over the black and blue on you, and there might be worse involved. When he said, this is what's for dinner, you were going to eat what's on your plate, or you weren't going to leave the dinner table, even if you camped out. Yeah. And it was real food that you raised. I slaughtered those animals. I fed those animals. I watched them go from being born to being on the plate. Hard work, craftsmanship, not lying to people, being honest, being on time. Those were the kinds of values that stuck with me. And no matter what color my fucking hair was, those things were imprinted into me, because values are learned before the ego is formed. So they're actually absorbed at an unconscious level. But what are the values kids are learning today? Well, look around. And so when they go out and paint their hair colors and forget what sex they are, they're doing it on the foundation of not having values and not having a sense of connection and meaningfulness and feeling part of something that they can fall back to when the shit hits the fan. Like, as much as it was my stepfather, my real father drowned when I was young, but as much as I did not like my stepfather. I'll give you an example of what I did value. My father was the president of the farming association where I was raised for a number of years and had a degree in agriculture. And about 10 years ago, the first report came out from entomologists worldwide who first noticed insect traffic was dropping radically. So they did a coordinated study. I believe there's over 50 contributors around the world. And they concluded that in the last 50 years, insect traffic had dropped 75%. In fact, the paper they produced was titled Armageddon May Be Near. Jeez. The first thing I did was get on and get in contact with my father, my stepfather, who's a farmer, and tell him. And I emailed him this paper. And his response was, "We're up Schitt's Creek without a paddle." And he said to me, "Do you remember when you were a kid on the farm, the mosquitoes were so thick, they would practically pick you up and carry you away?" I said, "Absolutely." He said, "I haven't seen a mosquito on this farm in years. This is serious fucking trouble right here." Yeah. How many people even have a clue that's going on right now? Do you realize the bees are very close to extinction? Rudolf Steiner said human life depends on two things: bees and trees. And when either of them reach a critically low level, life will cease to exist as you know it. We're clear cutting forests everywhere. We could have been farming hemp and completely eliminated that problem. I could go on and on. My point is, if you're a parent and you're not instilling values and morals, which are life affirmative codes of conduct, into children, it won't matter what color their hair is if they've got values, because they'll always come back to what supports life and what's really important in human relationships and in life.
And I think this is a very good lesson.
With the internet crisis and all this digital and babysitting your kids on Game Boys, we're putting people into the world that don't have values, don't have common sense, don't have creativity, can't communicate, aren't exercising, are eating shit day and night. And we wonder why we've got the problems that we've got.
We've overcome. There's a woman named Abigail Schreier wrote a book called Bad Therapy. And her argument is very compelling, is that idea that, just to simplify, we've basically medicalized childhood. The current generation of parents are so scared of harming their kids, of traumatizing their kids, that they're basically doing nothing. And the kids get away scot-free with everything. And that's the bubble wrapping and probably my favorite example of it is, if you go to any school, so I work in schools all the time, do not go during drop-off or pickup, because the line of cars stretches about a mile down the road. You will just sit there for a half hour because every parent comes and picks up their kid and every parent drops off their kid. Do you know how many parents picked up or dropped off kids from school when I was young?
Or me. I don't know anybody.
None. Are you kidding me? My parents are like, dude, you got a bike and you got feet and you got the bus. Pick your favorite. Get out of here. No parent did that, but we've kind of gotten this way where we're so afraid for their safety, for their development. We don't want to be mean like our parents were mean to us. So we've kind of farmed out childhood to technology and psychologists who are all about make things happy and nice and calm. And unfortunately, that exactly as you say, doesn't instill values. At some level, adolescence has to be pushing back against your parents. That's why just think of language. Every generation of adolescents gets their own slang. Yeah. That's how they learn to use language, by pushing back against the language that was given to them. They learn how to reform it. And then when they grow up, they can swing between what was given to me and what I've created. Cool. It's the same with everything. But if a kid never had limits put in place, if a kid has never had structure or consistent routines or repercussions, they have nothing to aspire to. So when they hit adolescence, what are they rebelling against? Nothing. So there's just this general malaise and almost nihilistic sense of everything is okay, nothing matters. Whenever I get to teach parents and work with them, it's going to sound horrible, but one of the things I say is, if your teenager says they hate you, good. Wear that as a sign of pride. By no means don't let them get away with it. I mean, if you tell me you hate me, you probably go into your room, but that means they feel safe enough around you to push back, and that you've established enough boundaries that they feel like there's something to push back against. If you are your kid's best friend, you probably made a mistake somewhere around the way. What you want is a 22, 23, 24-year-old to call you one day out of the blue and say, thank you.
Yeah.
You want your kid when they're in their 20s to call you and say, thank you. I was a butthead. You were mean. I was mean to you, but thank you. I get now why you were doing what you were doing.
Yeah.
And I'm worried that we're too worried about being liked by our kids and being nice, that maybe we're missing that essential. My job is to raise you. It's not to keep you alive because you're already an adult. It's to, like, and think about, like, so dyeing hair, that's crazy, right? But like, you could count the number of kids who had dyed hair in my school growing up because parents just did not let that happen.
Right.
Today, though, if you go, like, I take my daughter bowling, every kid's got dyed hair. Every kid is doing whatever they want to do.
We got teenagers getting plastic surgery. I see it all the time. It's mind-blowing.
And that's where, I'm not trying to call any parents out, but I think that was the natural reaction to. We look back and we were told our parents were so mean and cruel that we want to do something different for our kids. And I get it. I want my kid to love me too. But at some stage, our job is to be the parent. And how do we start to instill those values again about what genuinely matters with the knowledge that it's going to suck? Like, just take it to food. My daughter's 3 years old. If she had the choice, if she was in charge, she would have popsicles morning, noon, and night. That's all she wants is popsicles. And I step in as the adult and I say no. And she cries and she kicks and she screams. But I recognize, and I think most parents would recognize in this situation, no, sorry, I know more than you do. We have to recognize that with learning, with development, with values. They don't understand the value system yet unless we give it to them. And if we just say everything they do is right or good, or I'm here to support you, I don't know that we're instilling much that they can hang their hat on or rebel against.
No, and there's lots I could expand on that, but we've been going for a good while. So I want to kind of ask you just a couple more questions. If you could summarize what you know from all the research and observation and experience you have, what are a list of some of the well-documented physical, emotional, and mental side effects of the tech infusion into education and the overexposure to phones and social media that show up in the classroom and make kids very hard to educate and work with now?
Yeah, I'll bring it back. I'm going to go hit it from the other end before I come back, because I'm going to say, here's what I've kind of learned. Learning is a human endeavor. We are biologically built to learn from other humans. We can learn from other things. We learn from books, videos. I can learn from this. But we learn best, deepest, most transferably from other human beings. So at the end of the day, education is a humanistic endeavor. And the more we remember that, the better we get. Everything analog is basically better than everything digital. I mean, some things digital you can't do analog, in which case go to town. I can't do a fight simulator with a pencil. Right. But anytime you can, read hard copy paper, you will understand more than a screen. Writing, pen and paper, you'll understand, remember better than if you type it. Anything you can do offline, take it offline. If the goal is learning, take it offline. If the goal is production, who cares? Do something else. But I'm only talking about learning. So bring it back. What is tech doing? Tech is basically killing memory. The rapid switching tech demands means that now when I sit in a classroom and I have to pay attention for 20 minutes, can't do it. So attention is on the wane. Memory is wickedly on the wane because no one remembers anything. We just offload it to the computer. I know where to find it, but I don't remember the material itself. And I think what you're starting to see then is bigger moves. It's called cognitive outsourcing. Again, as an adult, I'm an expert. I've already developed everything. So when I use a tool to outsource, I'm making a conscious choice. When I use GPS to drive for me, it's because I don't feel like looking at a map. There will be consequences to that. The consequence is I no longer know my town. Why? Because I've never really looked at it. I've just looked at this map. That's been my trade-off. So even as an adult with completely developed sensibilities and cognitive faculties, I can still lose them when I outsource to tech. Now, get a kid who hasn't developed any cognitive capabilities or capacities yet. They outsource to tech. You're not losing anything. You are making sure key aspects and elements of life will never develop, and that forever they will be tied to, we call it a dependent program with the tool. So think about, like, there's in primary school, there are systems called LMS systems, which say, what are the biggest problems kids have? They struggle remembering to hand in homework. So this system will remind you of homework. They struggle completing their homework. So this system will remind them when they need to do the work by. They struggle sometimes organizing their homework. So this will break it down. Monday, you do this. Tuesday, you do this. So they do it. They hand in their homework. They get their A. Everyone's happy. But what did you just lose in that? You lost any opportunity. Bingo. For the kid to say, hey, I need to remember to keep this in my mind. I need to put this in my backpack, take it out at home, fill it out, and hand it to my teacher. All of those things develop what are called executive function skills. That's how you learn to run this machine. When you outsource executive function to tools, you get kids who are in 8th grade acting like 3rd graders used to act. And we go, and I don't mean intellectually. I mean, they cannot remember to hand in homework. They cannot understand how to line up to go to the bathroom. And you're like, you guys don't even know how to raise your hand yet? Because it's all been outsourced. Again, as an adult, I learned all that stuff, so I can choose when to outsource, when to not. And I understand the repercussions. Kids haven't even developed the basics yet, and we're throwing them on tools, which means they're never going to get the basic stuff. So that's where I think if we don't jump on it fast, we'll redefine executive function to mean what kids are doing. And all of a sudden we'll forget that 8-year-olds used to be able to sit through an hour-long class just fine. Yep. Why can't they now? Because they've never had to. Why would we expect them to?
You're making me remember something that's very appropriate to what you've just said. Are you old enough to remember what it meant if you called somebody a tool?
I remember that it was a slur, that you were a nerd if we called you a tool.
Well, when I would grow up, if you called somebody a tool, it meant they were stupid. You're as dumb as a hammer handle, you know?
So it did have a real meaning to it.
Oh, yeah. It means you can't do anything unless someone does something with you or for you. You can't think or do for yourself. You're a tool. Hammers don't build houses by themselves.
Yep.
So when I was young, one of the worst things you could be called was a tool because it meant you were useless unless somebody else was doing it for you.
Okay.
So
isn't that exactly what now we're choosing to do with our kids? Is I'm going to let this program. Yeah.
We're creating tools that can't function without tools. And
isn't it funny? I mean, what's the solution then? Because a tool, exactly as you said, a tool is only as good as what you bring to it. A hammer is only as good as the carpenter. I don't know carpentry. I know how to use a hammer just fine. I ain't going to be able to do much with it. Kids can't use tech. They don't know how to use it. Now, go back to kind of what you were saying. Some people might have seen or assumed a contradiction in here. Your 6-year-old can help you use your iPhone, but I thought we agreed kids are not as technically literate. Remember, literacy isn't use. Use is one aspect of literacy. Literacy, as measured in most fields, is going to be use, criticality, creativity, and with online stuff, we typically say safety or executive control. Kids can use tech just fine. They've been using it all their life. It's the criticality, the creativity, the executive functioning. They don't know what to use it for because they never developed anything. They're like me. I don't know carpentry. I know how to use a tool or a hammer. Do you think I'm hammer literate? I'm not hammer illiterate, but my God, I'm not as good as the guy down the street who built his house. It's going to be the same thing with tech. Our generation invented tech. So we know how to think through it. We already know how to learn. We already know how to understand. We're just using the tool to make our lives easier. When kids use these tools, they use them like gangbusters, but they do not know how to think through it. They have nothing to fall back on to make it worthwhile. They're not creating anything through it. So what do? We invent another digital tool to help them supplement the thing that they never developed in the first place. And then we invent another digital tool to help them supplement that. This is where AI is just going to cycle in on itself to the point where kids are doing nothing, handing in papers that AI wrote that was been generated, done by their LMS system. They didn't even have to think about it. The AI did it, handed it in for them. Teachers are then going to use the same AI to grade that work and offer feedback, which the kid is then going to use the AI. They don't even have to click on it. It'll just happen automatically to filter that feedback, change it. At no point will teachers of students ever interacted during this cycle. And we're going to be shocked when kids graduate functionally illiterate. And that's what universities are reporting. They're getting freshmen who are functionally illiterate. That's the system we are building. If tech fails, it's not tech's fault. We need another tech solution without recognizing, man, that's the medical model. If this made you sick, let me give you another pill that's going to make you better. And that's making you sick on this way. Let me give you another pill to make you better. Maybe the problem was the pills. And if we never took the pills, we might be all right.
Well, there's a common denominator that's been alive through this entire conversation, Jared. Who's always winning due to every one of the problems we've just discussed?
Yeah.
The tech industries.
Yeah.
That leads to my final question before I give you a chance to make your final statement. You quote Neil Postman's concepts of technopoly, the surrender of culture to technology. We're living in a moment where digital identity, digital currency, and digital surveillance are all accelerating simultaneously. Is the cognitive weakening you document in schools part of a broader cultural condition that makes this easier to implement without resistance?
100%. I don't think anyone could argue against that. Absolutely. And that's why there's an educator up in Canada named Andrew Cantarutti, he's making the best arguments about school needs to be what he calls a walled garden. We don't put walls around garden to keep the world out. We put walls around to make sure we can maintain the environment within. Yeah. And he's saying is anytime the outside world bleeds into the schoolroom, things are going to go down. We try and make school look more like work, things are going to go down. So he's the one making that argument that all of these things that people are saying are outdated. Long form reading, ability to sustain attention for 2 hours at a time, writing long essays. That's the kind of stuff that school needs to double down on, put up big walls and say no to everything else. Otherwise, as that bleeds, it's exactly as you said, it becomes easier for the entire system to continue to kind of churn what it's doing.
Yeah. And having studied AI a lot, I think everybody should really meditate deeply on the fact that there are 7 primary big AI corporations with large language models, and now getting beyond that have the greatest impact and influence on the world right now, all owned by men. Only 20 to 22% of the people in the entire AI industry are females. And here's the punchline. Nobody has ever been able to identify what the motives of those 7 men are.
But they've said some pretty interesting things here and there. Sam Altman, I'm going to butcher this quote, but it's a very real quote. Somebody asked him, is AI going to end humanity? It's probably 2 years ago. He goes, yep, AI probably will kill everybody, but we'll make some crazy profit margins before that.
Yeah.
That's where as far as I'm concerned, that's about as far as you're ever going to need to go. He flat out said, we're just in it for the money, baby.
Yeah. So the reason I bring that up is these are the things we all have to have on our conscious radar as we engage these things. Yeah. Because I'm preparing to do a solo podcast on AI to blow this thing wide open, and I've done a lot of research on it at a very deep level, which I'm also working on a podcast on glyphosate because I think that's another fucking issue. But you take everything you and I have just discussed about how you were raised, how I was raised, how you and I both parent, we share similar ideas on parenting. I don't like to be a guy that makes a position state about something that doesn't have any experience with it. So I have interviewed an AI tech expert, Rachel Miles. I've interviewed Federico Fagin about AI. And Rachel Miles has worked for these corporations making large language models. She's a programmer. She knows them inside out. She offers a free course on how to use AI and technology safely and intelligently. So I said to my soul, which is my inner self, I said, look, we're going to do this really deep dive into AI, but I don't want to be talking about something I don't have no experience, or I'm going to be like someone who pretends to be a sex expert that's a virgin. What should I do? And so my soul said, this is a while back, reach out to the people in your circle that know the most about AI and ask them which is the best one to use. So I did. I asked Rachel. She said, Claude Anthropic is the one that's the most truthful, least likely to manipulate you and be programmed in ways that are going to give you biased answers for what you want to do, I suggest. So I begin working with it, and I have been absolutely blown away at how powerful it is. But I said to my soul, aren't you concerned about us having negative side effects from AI? and my soul said, Paul, your creativity, your work ethic, and your model of how you think is so well developed. AI will never capture you because you're already too well established in your sense of self and who you are. But AI would be a great research assistant for you. You would find it very, very helpful, because I often have to hire professional librarians and researchers to do stuff for me. So I might spend $1,500 having research done on AI. I'll say, I want you to find this, 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 and this. And at 35 to 50 bucks an hour, I'll get a pile of documents back, or websites back, or things that I need to put the podcast together. I can do that in 20 minutes comparatively with AI, or an hour and a half. I've been researching glyphosate with AI, and the efficiency of it, finding exactly what I'm looking for, and having it reference it professionally like an academic paper, so I can backtrack everything. It's mind-blowing. So, I look at AI and what I've experienced with it now, and I can see, wow, if you have a work ethic and creativity, this is a very, very powerful tool. But if you haven't developed your own hermeneutic, your own inner gestalt, based on a set of values, based on a set of clear intentions and goals for what you're trying to achieve in life, and you don't have a sense of who you are, then AI is a very dangerous thing to hand to somebody.
Yeah, I think you just nailed it. It's a tool for expert production. It is not a tool for student learning.
Right.
And that's why people are you anti-AI? Yeah, but not for the reasons most people think. I'm anti-AI in K through 12 education for learning purposes. That is when kids need to develop the understanding. Literacy. People talk about digital literacy and AI literacy. Learn life literacy.
Yeah.
And then bring that to AI. It's easy. But if I teach you AI literacy, there's no guarantee you're not going to be a butthead out here, or you're going to have anything meaningful.
Right.
I mean, think of how stupid AI is. It's a box you type words into.
Yeah.
That's it. Do we really need to devote 2 months of curricular time to teaching kids how to type words into a box? No, the tool itself is easy. What we need to make sure is that they have enough deep knowledge, understanding, and self-awareness that they have meaningful questions to bring to the box. They understand how to vet the output from the box.
They have to have discernment.
Bingo. And that doesn't come by training on the tool.
No.
That comes by learning, by being in the world, and then using the tool. So I always say tech, AI especially, is something you have to earn. You have to earn the right to use it well. Just like film school, you have to earn the right to touch the camera. You have to prove you understand the world and have enough of a vision and understanding of the medium before I'm even going to let you touch it. Because now when you touch it, you're going to fly. But if I put it in your hands before, you will never devote the time to learning the deep stuff, because you're going to have so much fun playing with this toy that you're going to skip all the time and work it requires to make it work well. So again, AI, I'm glad you're using it. You're an adult. That's what it's there for. It is not for kids to learn.
Well, I think everything you're sharing is just bullseye and important. Before we close, I would love it if maybe you could just share some suggestions for people and for parents on how to manage the kind of complicated quagmire we're in with everything we've talked about. And thank you. You've been a very, very great person to talk to about this. I knew you would be, because the video clips I watched, you like, okay, this is the guy I got to get on my podcast right here. He's got a head on his shoulder. He's not just seeking attention by quoting facts. And I was right. So pat on the back for being able to spot talent. I'd just like to maybe have you say, look, as a parent and as an educator, here's like a few things. If you're going to just do 3 or 4 things now, what are they?
Yep. Step 1, buy a printer. Print everything out. If you change nothing else about your life, your kids' life, they're studying, they're learning, but you print everything out, learning will get better. So homework that's online, print it out. Readings that are online, print it out. Just go plant a tree, print everything out, because that's the number one move you can make. Specifically with parents working with kids, remember that memory is constructive. So recall. Memories only get deeper the more you access them. So if you think about like your favorite radio jingles, you've sung them a million times. That's why you remember it so well, not because you've heard it a million times. Meanwhile, things like logos, if you try from memory to draw the Apple logo from Macintosh, you'll be close. Try and draw a penny. You'll be close. You'll be in the ballpark, but you're not going to get any of the details. Why? Because you never pulled up those memories. Most of what kids do online, especially when it comes to learning, are not going to require recall. It's just going to require recognition. Can you find the correct answer? Can you look up the correct answer?
Yeah.
So if you're going to be working with your kids on homework or anything like that, recall. You've got to give them open-ended quiz questions, open-ended discussions that require them to pull the material out of their brain. That's how you know you're going to kind of get depth. So there's pedagogical aspects in that too. I would also say then, if you're a parent wanting to push back against tech, your first protocol is just going to be an opt-out. Some schools will say no, some will say yes. It will soon be legal in Vermont. They have to say yes, but you do have the ability to say, I would like to opt my kid out of all non-essential digital tech in school. I believe they can learn analog just fine. If there's a test they have to take online because it's state or mandated, sweet. Everything else, do it offline. Again, most schools will accommodate that. Some won't, but soon it will be legal, I think, in the next 2 or 3 years across the US. If it's not legal and you can't do it, get a coalition. That's when you just team up. Start with parents. One parent talking about tech and removing tech from schools is a nuisance. 10 parents talking about tech from schools, that's a movement. And now they have to pay attention. And do not wait for teachers to stand up. As we were saying earlier in this conversation, teachers don't really have a voice in education. Parents do. They have a much stronger voice, believe it or not. So if you get a coalition and you start to push back, teachers will be your biggest allies. I estimate 70% of teachers are done with tech. They just don't have any recourse. But if you start the battle, they will come on behind you and you'll have your biggest allies right there. So that would just kind of be my big kind of take home. As much as you can, go analog. As much as you can, go recall based. Make them use this and then start to work parents first, teachers in second. That's how we're going to push back.
Beautiful. It reminds me of when you did that. There used to be, you probably remember, used to be Uncle Sam Wants You. Wanted to recruit another. We got the new poster. Teachers want you.
Teachers want you to stand up and say something. Because that's a very true. I'm going to make that poster. That's not a bad idea.
Please send me one. I love it. In fact, right as you were saying that, I thought I should make that fucking poster because that's a really important. Teachers want you.
Need you.
Farmers want you. We need a farmers poster too.
Yes. Get back to basics. Well, Paul, thank you. This has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And if you have any final words or any websites you want to direct people to or anything upcoming, if you're working on a new book, feel free to just share whatever you want to share as we close.
So the book that we were talking about so far today is called The Digital Delusion. But in August, there's going to be a revised edition comes out with tons more data and stuff. People wanted more data, so there it is. So in August, look for the revised Digital Delusion. And also we have a website, LME Global, Learning Made Easy Global. That's where I put all my videos and articles and stuff and programs. So if you're just looking for more materials about learning, another place to turn to.
Thank you, Jared. Thank you for doing what you're doing. You're the first person I've ever seen do it in a very methodical way with a background in education. You're easy to understand. You're clear in your messaging. As an older guy, I would say if you were my son, I'd be damn proud of you. So keep it up.
Thank you so much. That makes me very happy. Keep doing the good work you're doing too.
Thank you, buddy. Well, lots of love to all of you. Thanks to all of you if you've listened this far, I know you're in line with the concerns Jared and I are expressing. And you heard his simple solutions. Start with a printer and talk to teachers and support them and get people together and think about 7 generations ahead or even 1 at this point.
Yeah.
And, we can do this. Education is the foundation for real change. If we don't have education, we can't make meaningful change because we don't know what the hell we're doing. So thank you, all of you, for listening to the podcast and being the change the world needs now. Thank you to my sponsors for your awesome products and for putting the hands of your money that you use to pay for the products, source materials into the hands of organic and biodynamic and regenerative farmers. Thanks to anything you guys buy from the sponsors, because you're supporting companies that are supporting you and the planet and the farmers that need our love and support. And you're supporting yourself, because I don't offer anything to you that I don't use myself or give my kids. And you've probably seen pictures of me stacking giant rocks at my age. So it's because I eat well and live close to the earth and have the kind of values that you can't get from a device. And so that's what this podcast is all about. So lots of love. Thanks to the sponsors. Thanks to you. Thanks, Jared. See you guys all next time with something awesome. I don't know if I can top Jared, but we'll see how we do. Oh.
Thank you for listening to Spirit Gym with Paul Chek and today's guest, Dr. Jared Horvath. Make sure you get a copy of Jared's book, The Digital Delusion, How Classroom Technology Harms Our Kids' Learning and How to Help Them Thrive Again. Available on Amazon and all good bookstores. Visit his website at lmeglobal.com to find out more about the Learning Blueprint and all the other resources available there. Connect with Jared on social media, YouTube at Jared Cooney, Instagram at jared.cooney.horvath, and Facebook at lmeglobal.net. For more interaction with Paul and to share ideas and ask questions about topics discussed in this podcast, we invite you to join his Spirit Gym program and community. You can participate in live Q&A sessions, access the members forum within the Spirit Gym community, chat with other members, attend virtual meetups with Paul, and study his comprehensive Master Key online program. Explore the options and subscribe today by going to myspiritgym.com. And finally, if you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to the show on the podcast platform of your choice. This podcast is available on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Audible, and YouTube.